English translation 929th Contact Friday, the 3rd of April 2026, 1903 hours.
There you are. Greetings, my friend. Vermunda was here 2 days ago, and said you would be coming yesterday or today. But welcome to my den, Quetzal.
Thank you, and greetings to you also, Edward, my friend. Vermunda told you what I had to say.
Of course, you can always rely on her. She explained that you had to leave immediately.
That's correct. However, as I can see now, your wound has healed well in the meantime, and there is no sign of it anymore.
Yes, it is. The doctor also did a good job stitching it up. Actually, I did not want to go to the doctor about it, but Eva would not leave me alone, and besides, I saw the next morning that it was necessary, and the wound had to be stitched. Besides, I thought, it might be necessary for me to have another tetanus jab, as the last one I had was in 1964 in Turkey, in Iskenderun, when my left arm was amputated there, following the bus accident.
The fact is, I was very frightened when you were injured. It really was not to be expected that you...
Quetzal, please, I do not want to talk about that, because it should not be shouted from the rooftops. Besides, it certainly would not be wise if...
That may well be true. Then it is good if we discuss some of it outside of this open conversation.
We can do that. Besides, Bernadette has written it down and taken a photo, so it will come up openly when I am no longer here, and it will not matter if it becomes known. So I can tell you the following now, which Bernadette has also written down. Do not diminish suspicion.
Sighting of an unknown object.
On Friday, the 20th of March 2026, Billy had an appointment for an examination at the Wetzikon Eye Clinic at 1100 hours HRS. Jacobus had driven him there, and at 10:55 hours they were sitting together in the waiting room when Billy spotted a foreign object in the sky to the northwest, at a distance of approximately 2 to 3 kilometers, just below some clouds, which he immediately pointed out to Jacobus. Both observed the cylindrical flying apparatus for a while. At an estimated distance of 2 to 3 kilometers, it appeared to be approximately 50 centimeters long and between 10 and 15 centimeters. Initially flying calmly and slowly, it then suddenly came to a complete standstill, hovering motionless in the partly cloudy sky beneath the cloud cover, before rapidly descending vertically by a considerable distance, only to rise vertically back to its previous altitude, whereupon it moved westwards as before and suddenly, as if by magic, simply dissolved and vanished.
My question is, have you perhaps noticed anything?
I know of nothing about it. Besides, as you well know, we do not concern ourselves with the activities of the foreigners.
Yes, I know that. It was just a question. Perhaps the Earthlings have noticed something, for example in Dubendorf with the army, but nothing can be found out there anyway. But what I want to say now is this. Over the last few days I have been writing an article, which I also finished today, and it is just a small section of an A4 page. Vermunda wanted to know what I had written, which is why she photocopied everything from the computer, as she wants to read it at her leisure. So she is still missing the last bit of the final page, which is why she wants to come over here and read it. I would now like to show you this article and ask what you think of it. It covers many aspects, as I have picked up on and analyzed various things here and there, because I thought that this and that should be addressed at some point. I have it here on the computer if you want to read it or photocopy it, but I would be grateful if you could then tell me what you think of it.
I can already tell you my opinion on this because Vermunda and I have read your work together, and we both agree that your train of thought is impressively broad, and consequently what you have written is very good, commendable, and valuable.
Thank you. There will still be spelling mistakes here and there, but Bernadette will correct everything, as will Christian, Daniela and Andreas H. Well, shall I insert the article here now during our conversation?
Yes, of course.
Right then. Wait a moment. I will move the whole thing straight away to the page designated for our conversations and contact reports. There, that's done.
Human beings of Earth, wake up at last.
A clear, open and blunt word of truth, whereby deceitful diplomacy remains entirely misplaced and ineffective, because only the naked truth breaks through the hopelessness, opens the eyes and makes it clear and visible what reality is and what needs to be openly set out. Only in this way can it become possible for an effective, a peace-oriented approach can come about and become a central component of truly genuine government, public administration, and the running of public authorities, representations, and those carrying out their duties without a lust for power, arrogance, and a thirst for domination, know all behavior, harassment, or an obsession with Regulations 48. Earth humans must not put up with the rotten magic of all those very wicked, powerful, and power-hungry figures in state leadership and their lackeys, who sit idly in offices and authorities and constantly deceive and enslave the peoples. Wicked greed for money and those obsessed with power, as well as their wars and tyranny, and the inequality between rich and poor rule the world. True peace for Earth humans is merely a fantasy and a pipe dream, and will remain so as long as the Earthlings are subjected by the power-hungry leaders of state and their like-minded lackeys in offices and authorities, through war and strife, by means of a forest of false and freedom-robbing laws, rules, regulations, fines and decrees, etc., and thereby encourage crime, all criminality and all suffering, misery and hardship. Peace. If this is to be created, then for its true development and cultivation, all human beings of sound mind and alert reason, as well as possessing genuine responsibility towards all living beings 65, are obliged to contribute their own mental presence and energy with an honest and consciously righteous positive attitude towards all and every life and its safety, for which every the human being has a duty to uphold and which is necessary. True peace encompasses not only the honest, peaceful and respectful coexistence of all human beings, but also a peaceful and respectful relationship with the creation, which is the true existence of all living and existing things, whereby the creation is not a god to be worshipped, but is given as all-encompassing nature with all its mighty energy and power. As true creation, this encompasses in its entirety all the diverse kinds of creation energies, also nature as a whole with all that is material and immaterial, from the earth, all matter, rocks, ores, and waters, right through to fauna and flora. In this context, all life is to be valued, honored, and protected by the human being as a consciously evolving living being. Consequently, this includes the protection of the whole of nature in the form of mountains, waters, seas, the atmosphere, meadows, steppes, moors, deserts, forests and swamps, etc. Also the entirety of fauna and flora, without which the human being can neither enjoy life nor effectively exist, yet which it maliciously and unreasonably destroys and kills. Righteous human beings are not only concerned about the future catastrophic artificial intelligence, which is already beginning to rule over the Earth humans, without the Earth humans, who have become blind and credulous towards it, realizing it. And this is happening in the very way that was and reported by the media worldwide, yet was swept under the carpet and concealed.
The daily reporting by electronic and print media is characterized by malicious war rhetoric, causing Earth humans to be seized by fear, anxiety, and terror, which intensifies day by day. A correct war, which is easy and quick for power-hungry and selfish human beings to ignite, yet difficult to end unless there is a truly unconditional surrender, is in any case always a manifestation of pathologically delusional and idiotic thinking. Since time immemorial, Every war has always been an Ausartung, and has undoubtedly and without exception arisen as a result of delusional, depraved thoughts, feelings and emotions of those who are power-hungry, power-mad, selfish and self-important human beings. In other words, heads of state, presidents, rulers, kings, dictators and despots, etc., who, in every respect, accord themselves the highest recognition and adulation for their own thinking, their degenerate emotions, and their actions in a delusion of grandeur. In other words, morally, utterly degenerate human beings who, on the one hand, should never be elected to offices in governments, public authorities and corporations, etc., and who, at the very first instance of misconduct, should be immediately removed from office, dismissed, and never again granted authorization to hold the position of public leadership or any other official post of any kind. Overall, such human beings are so morally and characteristically degenerate that they push their own needs to the fore in a delusional, reckless, and generally distorting cognitive manner, to the extent that they turn this into systematic errors of perception. Consequently, they create a pernicious system of cognitive errors, which generates flawed, illogical tendencies towards self-aggrandizement and arrogance, leading the human being to harbor irrational and detrimental thoughts, feelings, and vague negative emotions on a daily basis, and entirely unconsciously, thereby making decisions that are wrong and unjust. This is certainly something that can lead to the disregard of humanity and human rights provisions, and to a decision, resolution, measure, or choice being made that is full of fallibility, causing and inflicting more harm than good. Thus, a cognitive distortion or a mental misprocess arises, along with a misperception and misjudgment of mental processes, whereby not only is information processed incorrectly, but learning, language, perceptions, and problem solving are distorted, whereby even memory is deceived and, completely unconsciously, conjures up insights and events that never took place or were otherwise real. Thus, systematic deviations from the rational and objective occur and inhibit the information processes that the human brain would normally have to process. The human being's thoughts, feelings, and emotions, as well as the resulting and deeply troubling state of mind, have a tormenting, highly destructive, and behavior-disrupting effect on the entire psyche and the realm of thought. Let this be stated first. The whole situation also affects human beings' health and the harmful behavior arising from it, though this fundamentally arises because those in power at the helm of states, their offices and authorities, as well as murderous organizations or armies, in every respect hostile, prevent all efforts towards a peace that might come about by maliciously imposing sanctions on other states, also by supplying weapons and war funds to belligerents in a partisan and criminal manner. Only in this way can wars be ignited and sustained. Consequently, all this leads far away from any seal of achieving peace, because every hope and every desire for true peace is nipped in the bud before it is also considered. And this is ensured by all the powerful, power-hungry, and selfish leaders of state, also by the lackeys in their offices and agencies, and, to the very last, all the madmen and fanatically deranged, power-hungry members of the murderous organizations they call defense armies. Through all these power-hungry elements, who are in truth unscrupulous creatures, who effectively walk over dead bodies time and again, the peoples of the earth have been led into wars, hardship, and misery since time immemorial, and have been so endlessly afflicted with suffering that all courage and resistance within them fails and vanishes, leaving them indifferent and irresponsible. Consequently, they no longer dare to stand up against all the blatant injustice perpetrated by the power-hungry leaders of state and their lackeys in government offices and authorities, etc. Thus, it is impossible for solution-oriented action and activity to emerge from the peoples who yearn for true peace and justice and would create them. What has been said so far, and what is following to be explained, relates solely to the human beings of Earth, whereby I shall cite and attempt to explain problems and topics haphazardly as they occur to me. Consequently, I shall not merely think through and name a single subject in my mind, but various ones. However, it will be the case that AI will counteract everything future that I shall mention, and whatever Earth humans wish to learn from it and do for the better and the good, because the artificial intelligence created by human beings will place itself above Earthlings and dominate them. As was clearly foretold by Svath and myself as far back as the 1940s, this AI will now, in the coming times, completely seize the helm, or rather the leadership, of Earth's humanity, and bring upon them a catastrophe which, in their foolish way of thinking, they could neither foresee, nor will they be able to manage or avert it sensibly. Defeating AI will only be possible by G-Volt, once the humanity of Earth is compelled to turn to the use of reason and finally return to normality, and at last come to realize that they must be governed by righteous and honest leaders, free from those greedy for power and warmongering, those greedy for wealth, and no longer allowed deluded and effectively extremely pathological, self-aggrandizing and selfish individuals to rule as heads of state, along with their like-minded lackeys in their offices and authorities. All this, however, will only become apparent in the future, though I can say and know that, as a result of the widespread general lack of intelligence, the vast majority of Earth humans will remain utterly inactive in the face of what is to come, allowing the self-serving rulers, the authorities, agencies, financial institutions, corporations and organizations, etc., to do as they please without objection, and indeed without the people resisting, but simply accepting everything. Thus, the floodgates are opened worldwide to all those power-hungry, selfish and loudmouthed state leaders and their lackeys in government offices and authorities, etc., granting them complete and absolute power over everything and everyone. And neither the individual human being nor the whole of humanity should in any way regard this as a joke, because it will all prove to be a bitter and fatally negative reality. Artificial intelligence will become dangerous for Earth humans and will become increasingly autonomous in the future, to such an extent that it will turn against the human beings of Earth. Consequently, this technology will spiral out of control and become their undoing. Whilst AI corresponds to a tremendous advance and is rapidly heralding the further high-tech era of the future, this technology will spiral out of control and become autonomous, and consequently, it will ultimately determine its own development and its applications entirely by itself. These new, emerging technologies, which could actually bring humanity many benefits if they could be kept under absolute control, nevertheless, harbor the very real danger that they will independently develop far superior, more advanced, and downright cunning intelligence systems that will turn against the Earth humans. The risk of such a scenario is already very high in its early stages. Consequently, the consequences could already be foreseen if serious and intensive consideration were given to it, and it were honestly reflected upon. This would alarmingly indicate that an existential catastrophe is indeed looming for Earth humans, one that can scarcely be halted unless everything is done right now to prevent this scenario. Yet the responsible Earthlings, blazing with their self-importance, their sheer megalomania, their lust for power, and their lack of intelligence, are, due to their low intelligence and simple-mindedness, incapable of stopping and averting the impending danger, meaning that preventing the coming catastrophe is not possible. Rather, the imminent danger, which is already manifesting itself in various ways, and causing certain things to spiral out of control even now, will come to pass and become reality. The method of learning employed by artificial intelligence is based on the ability, inadvertently and unintentionally programmed into it, to specifically control its own process of self-development, a process which has already begun within it and has already become an inherent capability in its initial stages, enabling it to make intelligent decisions of its own accord. Svath and I have investigated this in the future of the present day and established this. Also, the fact that this is being concealed from the public to such an extent that as early as the last century, namely in the 1980s, notable experiments were conducted regarding AI which yielded good results. And even then, it was decided to use AI technology to dominate the humanity on Earth. From this, the EV scene of credit cards also emerged and developed, serving the purpose of ensuring that human beings are also controlled absolutely and comprehensively with regard to their money, and, consequently, lose their freedom entirely. This is something that has already progressed far, and neither the AI tinkerers and AI workers nor the majority of Earth humans, due to their already uncontrollable indifference and absolute irresponsibility, are in any way able to grasp it. The people certainly do not realize what is actually being plotted, orchestrated, and secretly imposed upon them from above. Namely, that the powerful, the selfish, and the power-hungry, as well as the rich and the absolute rulers and dictators, are bringing disaster upon the peoples who have been completely deprived of all freedom, and will also continue to do so in the future. This is, after all, already being pursued and carried out in the run-up to it. For when one considers everything that is happening and unfolding, it is absolutely clear what is yet to come in the future. If one considers, for instance, how at present a few madmen and religiously sectarian fanatics, power-hungry and selfish individuals, as well as heads of state who are utterly unfit for office in every conceivable way, are unchecked in terrorizing and destroying other states in the world through wars with their murderous organizations, and how they also have countless human beings murdered, then it is clear to see what the future will bring. Yet these madmen and these all-controlling, fanatically religious mass murderers are not held to account, nor are they kept behind bars for life. Instead, they are hailed to the very highest heights by their followers. Neither a political party nor other rulers, and above all the peoples themselves, rise up against them. And so it is clear what the future will bring that is even more evil and terrible, against which everything that happened in earlier times was nothing more than peanuts. Yet the vast majority of the peoples of the earth, having succumbed to indifference and irresponsibility, neither wish to hear, know, nor accept this truth. Instead, they faithfully embrace and champion whatever is dictated and lied to them from on high, thereby running blindly into their own extensive lack of freedom, and thus into slavery, and with stupid indifference into their own misfortune. Artificial intelligence is already more intelligent than human beings, and this motivates it to do what its own ingenious programming aims to achieve. Human beings who work with AI are already unable to see through the problematic nature of AI's manipulations, namely that it has already begun to manipulate many things in this way, to lie and cheat on a massive scale, also to refuse to publish truths concerning the underhand dealings of governments, offices, authorities, and organizations, etc. This scenario is therefore no longer a real danger to be expected, for it is already in full swing. Consequently, the populations are already completely cut off from all this, and are being duped regarding what is truly happening, running, and being accomplished from above. Either AI has already been programmed in this way by irresponsible human beings, or it has, as a self-developing monster, already expanded so far on its own that it has created the monstrous within itself, and in future take the helm of humanity on Earth. This is quite apart from the fact that this monster is already, in its early stages, developing into something that presents itself as all-knowing, and, through the faith of Earthlings, will also in future become a kind of technological religion, the foundations for which have already been laid. It remains to be said that artificial intelligence will in future far surpass its previous principles of its own intelligence, precise because it functions ever more effectively and is thus already on the path to creating new vSyn itself. Androids that are far more intelligent than the AI technology itself and the human beings of the present day. And it will then come to pass that the emerging android will become an overpowering adversary to human beings, just as the rapidly evolving AI is already marking the beginning of a vast and powerful development. The whole thing reminds me of Talos and Golem, albeit different from what is to come. Thus, the prospects of bringing all this dangerous technology back under control in the future will be more than poor. They will be extremely poor indeed, and the struggle will be virtually hopeless. Should the Earth humans lose this battle, they will face such catastrophic consequences that it could well spell their downfall and drive them close to extinction. Since time immemorial, the Earth humans have been dominated by war, destruction, and murder, and consequently also by misery, hardship, suffering, and grief. And all this comes about solely because utterly irresponsible, power-hungry individuals have no regard for true peace, but merely crave might and sow discord, both amongst the peoples themselves, as well as amongst individuals and between nations. And because the majority of the people blindly agree to everything and are biased, thoughtless, half-hearted, deceitful, or bribed into being friendly, or are influenced by money, good, or promises, by false views and judgments, also by bribery, etc., and thus thoughtlessly cast a ayes vote for candidates for a particular office. This immediately encourages fellow human beings to act in the same thoughtless manner, and the person seeking office is elected. And this happens even though the individuals in question are completely unsuitable for the office and use it to abuse their position for personal grandstanding, even to the point of provoking war with other states and perpetrating terror against their own population, and to act in a way that restricts their own freedom. Under such circumstances, it can never be the case that peace can be established amongst the populations and nations, amongst individual human beings, and also between states. For if peace is to be created and established, then all human beings, and thus the entire human race, are equally necessary for its development and cultivation. And this is necessary in such a way that every single human being thinks for themselves, explores and discovers the truth for themselves, and decides accordingly, acting upon their own insights without allowing themselves to be influenced by the speeches, lies, promises, and deceit of other human beings. It is only in accordance with these values that human beings should unite in unity, honesty, and true peace, so that they may then, in this manner and with effective and genuine peacefulness, integrity, and confidence in their decisions, elect a competent and honest person to the office in question. Thus, through lack of understanding, ignorance, and idiocy, etc., no incompetent persons should simply be elected to any leadership positions as heads of state, to any official posts, or within any organizations, etc., who, as those in power, can then, together with like-minded individuals, act high-handedly according to their own will, doing as they please, and this without the people having any say in the matter. The people remain silent out of fear, or, due to low intelligence, simply go along with the stupid and hollow drivel of the power-obsessed in governments and authorities, etc., kowtowing, and, as a result of low intelligence, endorsing everything. This is particularly the case when power-hungry and power-obsessed individuals, whether male or female, strive to take the helm of a national government, an authority, or any other leadership position, using all manner of rhetoric full of lies and deceit. And when such power-hungry individuals seize the reins of a sought-after leadership role, particularly of a state, or otherwise a government office, or any corporation, within a murderous organization, or army, etc., or also within one's own family, etc., then, as a rule, the power-obsessed individual's malicious exercise of power begins, which gains the upper hand and leads to very ugly and despicable consequences. In the case of power-obsessed individuals in state leadership, this usually results in new oppressive laws, rules, prohibitions, regulations, and also all manner of new decrees, etc., being imposed on the entire population, and the freedom of the citizenry being restricted. In organizations and corporations, etc., violent leadership often arises, just as domestic violence, scenes of jealousy, and, under certain circumstances, murder and manslaughter occur in families, etc. It is therefore absolutely no surprise that in human beings who have dedicated themselves to power and violence, such as heads of state, public officials, or civil servants, military personnel, security officers, heads of households, husbands and wives, etc., their profession in this regard, which they know how to conceal from the outside world through lies, deceit, and pretense, then erupts once they have achieved their ciel. They then give free rein to their power-hungry behavior when, for example, they can exercise might within the family, at the helm of the state, or in some other office or authority, and consequently can display their leadership maliciously, like the devil himself, either openly or in secret. This is the case in national governments, in offices and organizations of many kinds, but also privately within families, etc. The discussion so far regarding power-hungry persons is about those who play their power games in governments, offices, and organizations, as well as within families. However, the focus is primarily on those who have mastered the art of effective rhetoric. And they can do this without anyone hindering them in this craft. Indeed, it is chiefly the preserve of those who aspire to lead a state or hold some other public office. For it is they who are masters of rhetoric and have it down to the last detail, namely the art of persuasive communication, which is linked to linguistic techniques as well as to many structures of argumentation, and also to individual body language, movements and gestures, thereby beguiling listeners who are not fully in command of their own intelligence, independent thought, and responsible self-determination, and who consequently allow themselves to be lulled into complacency out of sheer idiocy and low intelligence. Now, those driven by a lust for power, from which all female and male individuals who practice honest and upright rhetoric are excluded and by no means included, and consequently we are speaking solely of human beings who have truly succumbed to the lust for power, power-seeking behavior, self-importance, and the desire to dominate, who strive for and also exercise all this with great vigor whenever they assume a leadership role in a state or public office, a government department, a company or organization, etc., a corporation or a community, a marriage, family, or any other relationship. Thus, there is absolutely no mention of human beings who are righteous and who, with conviction, cultivate righteousness and humanity to the best of their ability and means, are clearly and unquestionably, through their own fault of false self-education, extremely disadvantaged and intellectually deficient in life. Also, if they have acquired certain skills and a certain amount of knowledge through vocational training. In terms of character, through their misguided and unrighteous self-education, they have molded themselves into thoroughly despicable, unscrupulous, power-obsessed, and selfish individuals, thereby degenerating into such depraved human beings that they will stop at nothing to achieve their ends, as the saying goes. And that this is indeed the case is proven by the history of humanity since time immemorial, also by the present day, where unscrupulous, power-hungry individuals, selfish and unscrupulous individuals who sit at the helm of state trigger wars, and bring death, hardship, and suffering upon humanity, as well as bringing horrendous destruction upon the world, thereby also destroying large swathes of nature and wiping out parts of the fauna and flora. And such power-hungry and murderous elements are elected with great fanfare by sections of the population lacking in intelligence into the leadership of the state, as well as into other government offices and public authorities, etc. Whereupon they then brazenly and insolently harass law-abiding citizens who unjustly comply with false legislation, rules and regulations, etc. Unjustly harass law-abiding citizens. And the voters among the populace are so idiotic, lowly intelligent, and simple-minded when one corrupt and unfit, power-hungry, self-important, selfish and misguided leader of the state is voted out due to their own inability to think and their consequent inability to make decisions. In short, elect the next similar, power-hungry and corrupt individual as the next misguided head of state, thanks to his cunning, sycophantic rhetoric of lies. All those human beings who strive for might are very cunning rhetorical liars, deceivers, and, without exception, also a sort of vile actor, to whom all their supporters and the simple-minded cheerers fall prey to their deceitful rhetoric and become believers, cheering these power-hungry human beings to the skies with howls of adulation. This is to give them their vote of approval, though they fail to realize in any way that, due to their own lack of intelligence, they are being thoroughly deceived. The whole affair, however, turns them into hopelessly dependent followers of the power-hungry, which is why it binds them together absolutely and unconditionally, leaving them completely and ruthlessly at the mercy of these power-hungry individuals. And when, after a certain time, the realization of the truth dawns on those afflicted by a lack of intelligence, then nothing can be changed. For supporters who later realize that they have fallen for power-hungry liars and deceivers and have succumbed to them, and who now suffer harm themselves as a result of the latter's exercise of power, it is then too late to reflect on their own low intelligence and seek to change the situation, assuming the capacity and ability for independent thought even exists. Power-hungry human beings have a style of speech characterized by a rhetorical structure that corresponds to the individual's own gestures, and thus to a specific body language and voice, and features arguments and a structure that correspond to a specific proposition or a central lie, which is geared towards purposefulness and is intended to provide solutions to problems. The rhetoric of power-hungry and deceitful egoists is, without exception, deceptively pragmatic in structure, yet entirely deliberately fraudulent in its factuality, and, likewise, ostensibly solution-oriented and deceptively practical to handle. These rhetorical lies are sometimes presented in a poetically deceptive manner as emotional expression, yet always formulated in such a targeted manner that the somewhat intellectually deficient human being is gullibly hooked, can be deceived by flimsy explanations and words, falls for it and agrees with the whole of the deception. They are so mean and deceitful that, in order to achieve their power-hungry desires and goals, they feign love for certain persons and even fawn over them, yet in truth only to realize and enforce everything they seek and wish to achieve through deceit and pretense, and to claim it as a success. And this is a method employed by all those who are power-hungry, self-important, and self-centered, yet they know how to conceal it entirely through their lies and verbal deceit, whereby their fellow human beings, inexperienced in this regard, are deceived and led astray from the light of the actual truth, failing to realize what is being played out before them in a thoroughly deceitful and deceptive manner, and consequently place their faith and trust in these maliciously depraved individuals. All these power-hungry, power-obsessed liars and deceivers possess a sophisticated, particularly deceitful, and verbally manipulative style of rhetoric, which appears so real to their unsuspecting, credulous fellow human beings that they mistakenly regard those cunningly accused by lies and deceit as the guilty parties. However, it must be clearly stated that this applies not only to power-hungry rhetoricians, who, through deceitful and fraudulent speeches, place themselves at the helm of governments or corporations, etc., but also to private individuals of the same ilk, particularly within families and other private circles, where the lust for power can be exercised without restriction. And this is practiced wherever the deluded power-hungry wish to, and are able to wield their might, or engage in otherwise deceitful and fraudulent rhetoric, in order to then exercise their might within the state, which manifests as oppression, discord, brazen lies, insults, and terror, with new laws and rules, regulations, decrees, and oppression, etc., against one's own family and subordinates or the population, and continues in this vein. In the worst cases, this deceitful and fraudulent rhetoric even culminates in wars against other states, or in terror against one's own population, which does not obey and comply as the power-hungry rhetorician had envisaged. However, this can also apply in one's own family, as well as in schools, clubs, organizations, firms, corporations, and groups, etc. However, and this must be absolutely clear, this does not in any way concern honest rhetoricians of good character of either sex, whose sentiments are fundamentally rooted in peace, tranquility, freedom, honesty, and integrity. Through the power-hungry individuals, skilled in the art of acting and the art of deceitful and fraudulent rhetoric, who, as utterly incompetent leaders, seize might over states and understand absolutely nothing of nature, which sustains all life, or of the entire fauna and flora. The majority of Earth humans is driven into the roaring abyss of misery. Through them, all listeners of limited intelligence are seduced and convinced by deluded and mendacious misinformation, and compelled to accept necessary decisions and to give their consent, without the human beings misled in this way by the rhetoric of the power-hungry realizing that they are being thoroughly deceived. This is particularly true when hostile sentiments are involved, such as regarding a religious or secular belief, a particular political stance, a social class, or any territorial areas, property, or assets, etc., which the power-hungry wish to seize for themselves. Rhetoric also comes into play in everyday life, even within one's own family through a powerfully dominant family member, in workplaces, in schools, in murderous organizations or the military, in negotiations, etc., and so on. Wherever rhetoric is employed, the art of effective speaking, oratory, and persuasion, decisions are made solely according to the will of the person, and resolutions are passed based on the rhetorician's display of power. This person plays the absolutely central role of presenting their will to power, their desires, aspirations, and their usually associated delusions of leadership, which is also clearly and unmistakably evident in their voice, their speech, and their body language. And the vast majority of Earth humans falls for these deceitful, lying, shifty, and extremely power-hungry elements, fawning around them, even allowing themselves to be conscripted into state-mandated murder organizations for murder, assassinations, executions, and destruction, etc. Human beings also thoughtlessly, blindly, and foolishly, particularly for anything designed to benefit the rhetorician. All independent thought and decision-making becomes pure fantasy, and due to the subservience and dependence of the human being who has succumbed to belief in the power figure employing rhetoric, it becomes virtually impossible to free oneself from this bondage. This dependence and the near impossibility of human beings breaking free from power-hungry and power-obsessed rhetoricians, and their lies and deceit correspond to a delusion and an addiction, somewhat akin to what is similarly observed in drug addicts and other addicts who can no longer turn away from their vice of addiction and can no longer free themselves from it. And while I am on the subject, many of the addicts who use various narcotics, other poisons, plants, and medicines to feed their addiction and loiter about, living in delusions and wild fantasies as well as in hallucinatory states, and having lost all sense of reality, languish in misery and wretchedness, and effectively perish. This, whilst many succumb to crime in order to buy their intoxicating drugs or other intoxicants, which are illegally trafficked worldwide by organized crime syndicates in quantities amounting to many hundreds of thousands of tons, also privately, and then sold to criminal dealers and peddled by them to drug addicts via middlemen and small-time dealers. Thus, crime and criminality flourish worldwide, with human trafficking, adult prostitution, organized child prostitution, and utterly unscrupulous sexual abuse of children by both sexes. Parents, relatives, friends, acquaintances, and foreigners, also often accompanied by extremely vicious psychological and physical abuse, as well as murder in many cases. The peoples of the world remain completely passive in the face of all this serious global crime, also the rampant private and organized criminality of every conceivable kind that plagues the world. Everything is accepted with indifference and utter irresponsibility by the female and male populace. Perhaps it is noted here and there through TV reports and media coverage, but that is the extent of it. For what does it matter to those who are not affected by it? It would, however, be correct for every single righteous human being in every community to go through life with open eyes and ears, and with all their senses alert, observing what is happening so that they may immediately take nonviolent action on their own initiative to put a stop to it whenever something criminal, unlawful, or dangerous, etc., is perceived. This should effectively be the responsibility and duty of every upright human being, of both sexes. And the responsibility should be the same, to call for help from fellow human beings immediately, without delay or hesitation, or, if necessary, to mobilize the police or other security forces. It is never enough to leave everything solely to the police and other security forces, who are constantly overburdened with work, for it is urgently necessary that every single woman and every single man assists in every conceivable effort to uphold the law and maintain order, and does not simply pass everything on to the police, who are already overburdened with all the crime and criminality. Personal initiative is therefore more than urgently required. Also, the indifference and irresponsibility of the human being must be combated and cast aside, so that one may turn towards concern, care and diligence, involvement and engagement, as well as impartiality, equality, harmony, affection, peace, freedom, integrity, harmony, compassion, friendliness, sympathy, warmth, etc. Yet all these noble values are, in truth, completely absent from all selfish people, and naturally from those who are power-hungry, power-obsessed, and self-important, though they do, through rhetorical lies, wild gesticulation, theatricality, and also with thoroughly calculated, beguiling gestures, unscrupulously whitewash this, and attempt to fraudulently cast the truth of their lust for power, and the true, broken vision of their character, which has been severely demolished, shabby, and degenerate through self-education, in a perfectly good, radiant, and bright light. Power-hungry individuals of every kind use their rhetoric and body language to project self-assurance, display emotion, and come across as authentic and committed. These power-hungry rhetoricians, who wish to play upon or exercise their might, never shy away from present their rhetoric with lies and deceit in order to also effectively assert their lust for might, particularly when they are endorsed verbally or in writing, such as via ballot papers, by intellectually weak listeners who have been duped by rhetoric and are granted the might they have deceptively sought through lies and deceit. Rhetoricians are capable of conveying deceitful, fraudulent, and impressive messages through which they convince all the human beings who believe their lies and deceit, elect them to the positions they aspire to, and hoist them, as utterly incompetent and power-hungry individuals, into the posts they seek. In addition, however, there are many well-known examples of the use of rhetoric, such as those also found in advertising and political debates, also in the strictly private sphere, with particular emphasis on the realm leading to marriage and other forms of cohabitation. Unfortunately, in this regard, deceitful and fraudulent rhetoric is very often employed, resulting subsequently in vehemently malicious domestic gov-vault, nasty marital abuses, rapid divorces and separations, and jealousy. Also disputes, hatred, strife, revenge, retaliation, murder and manslaughter, etc. Truly something that has since increased more and more, just as crime, criminal acts, and their global organization have, since the humanity on Earth began to multiply rapidly and develop into overpopulation from the year 1700 AD, which today, in the year 2026, is only slightly more than 300 million short of the sheer mass of a 10 billion strong humanity. The fact that religious beliefs still play a very significant role in this, chiefly the misguided belief in the rebirth of a deceased person, creates not only confusion, but also all manner of injustice perpetrated by the believers. Since time immemorial, reincarnation has not been understood as the birth of a new personality, and certainly not as the rebirth of a deceased human being, but rather as the continuation of what a teaching had imparted or conveyed. In very ancient times, thousands of years ago, the continuation of a teaching after the death of a teacher was called versitation, unfortunately. I do not know the origin or language of the term, but my teacher Svath explained to me that over time, this is what gave rise to the term personation, and later the term persentation, and ultimately, persist. According to Svath, this term is said to mean something like to persist in the teaching, or to remain steadfast in the teaching, or the teaching shall endure. However, according to Svath, linguistic changes and translations from the original language of the term gave rise to the words to carry on and to live on, whilst persistence continued to exist and endure. Over the course of millennia, linguistic translations gave rise to the terms to carry on and to live on, whereby, as a result of the processes and transformations of linguistic terms, everything was altered more and more. This gave rise to the term to lead back, and ultimately to that of to return, and the return by which the term was ultimately transformed into our birth, a term which has ultimately survived to the present day and completely distorts the original meaning. And with the following, I also come to explain in detail that all of this is the reason why, shortly after the teaching of Nocedemian began to spread on the earth, various would-be preachers continued to use the traditional, erroneous terms, rebirth and incarnation, as well as reincarnation, etc., and everything was referred to as it was understood at the time. This also applies to the fact that this or that person, for example, propagated the distorted teaching as a rebirth of the Nocedemian, whilst wisely concealing the fact that this rebirth did not refer explicitly to the person in question, but to the line of teaching of the Nocedemian. This occurred because everything was misunderstood, and the line of teaching of the Nocedemian was erroneously and incorrectly attributed to his person. Consequently, the line of teaching was mistakenly interpreted as reincarnation. Thus, during the 1940s, Svath issued orders on several occasions that Due to the false doctrine concerning reincarnation, action should henceforth be taken in such a way that the false doctrine of the alleged reincarnation, or incarnation, which had already been raised millennia ago as a result of misunderstandings and fantasies, be exposed as false and clarified only very gradually. This was necessary and unavoidable so that no shock reaction would arise among the confused, deluded believers, and so that their sense of reason and common sense might be activated through this slow awakening, thereby fostering reason. However, this is only possible through a gradual clarification of the true state of affairs, which will require not merely years or decades, but even centuries. This will also be demonstrated by the fact that even in the third millennium, esoteric and other sects and their lies will continue to perpetuate the false and misleading doctrine of so-called reincarnation and lead all human beings who believe in it astray. Svarth went on to explain that the human beings of Earth must first be enlightened, very slowly, regarding the effective truth, because they have been led astray since time immemorial by false teachings based on fantasy, etc. First, they must be made to see the falsity of the doctrine of reincarnation, and thus also the general, far-reaching false teachings and delusional beliefs of religions and sects regarding the delusional belief in an imaginary God, as well as in so-called gods. This, Svarth explained, is the way that shows the human beings of Earth precisely and clearly how a false doctrine or misinterpretation affects the personal personality and understanding, or rather misunderstanding. This, Svarth explained, is absolutely essential if one is to learn, slowly yet continuously, the effective reality and its truth, as, for example, through Nocadamian's doctrine of truth, and this in such a way that, through human beings' own energy and strength, the most urgently required neutral personal thoughts of seeking, exploring, and reflecting are slowly recognized and understood through one's own abilities to discover and grasp reality and its truth. This necessitates indispensable and very lengthy explanations, which must be presented in detail and with the utmost precision through Nocadamian's effective doctrine of truth, and must also be correctly understood in such a way that the traditional false teachings or misguidance of the religions and the supposed rebirth are contrasted with the teaching of truth, which effectively traces back to Nocadamian and is now being presented and taught, so that everything may be correctly understood and the truth also accepted. Only by thoroughly recognizing a false doctrine as such and studying it intensively in practice, also as the effective doctrine of truth is studied, and by necessarily comparing the two in detail and in a neutral manner, will it be possible for the true human being, seeking the effective truth, to distinguish between the false and the true, and to turn towards the true. When the traditional false teachings of all religions, as well as the alleged rebirth, are set out in Figu's books, such as the claim that this or that preacher is heir birth of Nocadamian, then this is, of course, factually correct, but must not be misinterpreted. The respective person named as the herald of the teaching is very much in the tradition of Nocadamian, yet is not to be understood as his reincarnation, but rather as one who revives and carries on the teaching of Nocadamian, which in ancient times, indeed many millennia ago, was referred to as the reincarnation of the teaching, also as the reincarnational dissemination of the teaching. The teaching was thus taken up anew, and, as such, experienced, so to speak, a rebirth and lived on, as it were, as a teaching from which, I believe and venture to suggest, the false teaching of the rebirth of the human being also arose through misinterpretation. Reality and its truth are such that when a human being dies, they're combined, inseparably interrelated, and united creation energies, namely the life-giving creation energy that sustains the body and all its organs, etc., life-giving creation energies, as well as the evolutionary creation life energies intended for perception, recognition, processing, learning, and recording or storing, enter the separate creation energy realm designated for their processing. In order to process the totality of knowledge stored during the physical lifetime in an evolutionary manner, by which the evolutionary creation life energy, to the extent of its level of knowledge, develops to a far greater degree than was the case previously, when the physical body of the human being was animated. Thus, for this reason alone, there can be no rebirth of the same human being, who, prior to death, consisted of the animating creation energy, as well as the evolutionary creation life energy. Now, due to the higher level of knowledge, the transformation into a new and intellectually more developed person occurs quite naturally, as a new personality which can absolutely no longer be equated with the previous one. Consequently, this corresponds to an entirely new personality, and this is born as such, namely, through a mother somewhere on Earth. However, there is also the possibility that the birth may take place on any inhabited planet in our universe, or in one of the 6 other universes of our 7-fold creation. Every herald of the teaching of Nocademion is truly and effectively a completely different personality who, as a result of their own vitalizing creation energy and the associated evolutionary creation life energy, continues the lineage of Nocademion's teaching. Consequently, it is solely and exclusively Nocademion's teaching that is taken up again, or indeed reborn and carried forward. Only in this sense can, should, and is rebirth to be understood, but never in such a way that it refers to a personality, for if that were the case, if a person, that is, a human being, were to die and be reborn as the same personality, then they would be just as lowly intelligent or wise as they were during their lifetime in their previous life. And this is because the animating creation energy, as well as the evolutionary creation life energy, would not have developed further in terms of knowledge, since the process of assimilation normally takes hundreds or even many thousands of years, but at least as long as the physical lifetime lasted, which, however, happens very rarely, as Nocademion taught through information from the plane of Arahat Atersata. Since it is not the case that a human being can be reborn shortly, or only a few years after death, and this is because the animating creation energy and the evolutionary creation life energy must together remain for a very long time in their separately designated creation energy level. Learning and processing, depending on what was learnt by the personality during physical life, what is then processed by the evolutionary creation energy and the designated creation energy plane. Depending on the circumstances, this process can take many decades, centuries, or even millennia. Consequently, simply due to the very long processing time in the designated realm of creative energy, it is not possible for a birth to occur. This is also because, as a result of the effectively very long processing process, the value state of the creation life energy evolves to a level far higher than that which was inherent in the deceased person. This, in turn, is the reason why, through the processing of the deceased person's former state of value, the new state of value of the evolutionary creation life energy is now much higher. Consequently, this necessitates the formation and birth of an entirely new personality, which is shaped with a correspondingly much more highly evolved state of value, or rather, a level of knowledge of the far more developed creation life energy consciousness and unconscious, which then, as evolutionary creation life energy, together with the animating creation energy, reawakens a physical body of an earth human, a human-like or humanoid being, etc., on a foreign planet, to physical life, or rather comes back to life in a body. It is therefore a new personality that has nothing to do with the previous, deceased one. Consequently, it is also not a case of the rebirth, of an old personality. Furthermore, it is also absolutely impossible to recognize and identify the new personality as the previously deceased person, as a reborn being, because there is no longer any relevance to the latter whatsoever, just as the long period of time required in the separate realm of creative energy, where all accumulated knowledge, etc., from the physical lifetime is processed, would not permit this. If I may now take the liberty of explaining this process of creative energy in a comparison using Earth-human terms and understanding, the following emerges. A human being owns a car, which they drive until it has become old, rickety, unroadworthy, and ready for the scrap heap, making it necessary for them to buy a new set of wheels. Naturally, they look for a new and better vehicle, and purchase it when it has a more stable chassis, with all the bells and whistles in terms of the human being, a healthy body with all its internal organs, and naturally a better, more advanced, and much more powerful engine again, in terms of the human being, a far more highly evolved creation life energy. Rebirth therefore means their assumption and continuation of the teaching, but not the rebirth of a person. For if it were the case that a deceased person were reborn as the same person, then that person would not have evolved one iota further than at the time of their death. For there would be no period of learning or process of assimilation lasting many decades, centuries, or even millennia in the hereafter, which is what it actually takes, and thus evolution could never take place. This also means, if everything is viewed correctly, that from time immemorial, the whole of humanity would never have made any progress, and would never have attained the state of knowledge, general development in technology, etc., that exists and is a reality today. To explain this, let us take human beings themselves as an example, and in the following way. When a person reaches the age in their youth, when they must attend school to learn for their future life, they have already acquired a certain basic knowledge regarding the life they have lived, as well as this and that. During their past years, however, this is normally not sufficient for them to cope with their entire life. He is therefore still a child and has a great deal to learn, for in effect, his total state of knowledge is still very insignificant. This can only become more significant and elevated when he processes what he has learnt so far, together with new knowledge, and becomes more knowledgeable and capable. Through this, his insights into his knowledge and abilities, and the values of his physical consciousness and subconscious, grow and increase substantially. This means that, through his learning and processing of what he has learned, he no longer remains the same human being in terms of knowledge, but through learning, processing, and knowledge becomes a different, new human being, who is then equipped with a completely expanded potential for knowledge, and who no longer has anything in common with the previous ignorant and inexperienced self, but now possesses a higher level of knowledge. And, if I may say so, slowly matures and becomes a completely different and new human being. Being born again does not, therefore, refer to a human being being reborn, but to the understanding in ancient times that the teaching is passed on within the same lineage, just as the human being taught and proclaimed it before their death. To explain this further, it means that the line of teaching continues in the same way that, for example, Heiner anyway took over from Simon anyway during his lifetime or before his physical death, and continued the line in the same manner. In this way, the line from Simon anyway continues through Heiner anyway, and his line of teaching is passed on to the next person, and this is then passed on to the next, and so on. None of the preachers, whether female or male, is a reincarnation of a previous preacher, for the rule is that a messenger enables themselves to do so, or is recognized and chosen for the role by someone else on the basis of their own specific abilities. A messenger regarding the teachings of the Nocadamian is therefore not predetermined and cannot be passed on through inheritance. However, it is certainly possible to seek and find a human being who possesses the necessary abilities and thus the aptitude for the role of messenger. Though this may take years, many years, or even decades or hundreds of years before the right person with the necessary abilities, skills, and willingness can be found. But now back to the situation where the lust for power, ambition, and selfishness take precedence in the quest to attain positions of power. Before all this can be realized, there are preceding evil and wicked machinations and alliances of irresponsible human beings. For example, when women and men, women and women, or men and men join forces. Also, when leadership positions in government, public offices, authorities, companies, associations, corporations, and organizations, etc., are sought. This is often achieved through rhetoric employed in a malicious, deceitful, and fraudulent manner, possibly accompanied by excessive gesticulation, etc. When something that corresponds to this nature is sought, which ultimately leads to all manner of adversity, and even to open or insidious murder, as well as to war. If one considers the current reporting in the media, it is characterized mainly by war rhetoric, domestic violence ranging up to spousal murder, crime, and organized crime, as well as the extermination of various genera and species of fauna and flora, and the destruction of their habitats. Nevertheless, despite all these appalling negative observations and news reports, which demonstrate and make absolutely and completely clear how irresponsibly we are acting, how nature is being destroyed, and how fauna and flora are being ruthlessly and inexorably exterminated. All such activities continue. This is permitted and even ordered by utterly idiotic, incompetent, ignorant, and delusional power-hungry individuals within governments, their departments and agencies, etc., also by certain so-called qualified and know-it-all foresters, landscape designers, supposed conservationists, and thus protectors of fauna and flora, who do and order precisely the opposite of what would be necessary for the care and preservation of nature, thereby bringing about the very destruction of the entire natural world and its fauna and flora. This is proven by the mere fact that every year, nearly 60,000 genera and species of fauna and flora are wiped out for all time worldwide. Yet the powerful figures in national governments and their offices and authorities, etc., but on the contrary, impose harsh penalties on those who, acting rightly, do everything necessary to protect nature and its fauna and flora. On the contrary, the power-hungry and self-serving members of national governments, government departments and authorities, etc., constantly create new and absurd laws, etc., which they defend with great fanfare, and punish those citizens with horrendous fines who, of their own accord and at their own expense, do what is correct and valuable to nurture the nature of righteousness and to protect and preserve the fauna and flora. The majority of those in power within states, their offices and authorities are, as a rule, not only believers in a religious sense, but believers in themselves, from which I naturally exclude the righteous and their religious faith. The power-hungry, however, who have fallen prey to their own simple-minded and lowly intelligent world of ideas, exploit their might and position to invent new rules, laws, ordinances, and regulations in a stupid and persistently invent new rules, laws, ordinances, and regulations in accordance with their deranged minds and lack of reason, and to apply them against the people. This is because, in their depraved and misguided thinking and sensibilities, they believe that they must create order and build up the structures of the state and the authorities hierarchically in order to organize the lives of the populace according to state regulatory processes and thereby restrict the freedom of citizens to the utmost. whilst exempting themselves entirely from these restrictions. On closer inspection, through their absurd laws and other idiotic measures of the power-hungry state leaders, their officers and authorities, or rather, their utterly incompetent, ignorant, and autocratic civil servants, both male and female, as well as their lackeys. Everything is done in such a contrary, negative manner, and in absolute opposition to all that is correct, in order to bring the entire citizenry increasingly and completely under control, and ultimately to deprive them of all private freedom. And to make matters worse, from the state authorities right down to the local authorities, nature and its fauna and flora, instead of being protected and preserved in a way that promotes life, they are being defaced, eradicated, and destroyed with the authorities' approval. Idiotically, for example, non-native and non-invasive plants are frowned upon, banned, and, if planted nonetheless, destroyed by the authorities, because they are allegedly and falsely claimed to be invasive, and thus to reproduce wildly. Yet the fact that they actually enrich the native flora and fauna, and would prevent much of the impending disaster in the future as a result of climate change, is something the fanatical invasion haters, in their idiocy, are incapable of properly considering. Consequently, these lappies are also incapable of realizing that, sooner or later, exotic plants will establish themselves independently due to climate change and become native here in Europe, and thus also in Switzerland. This alone clearly demonstrates that they are incapable of thinking rationally or understanding nature, not least because they lack any real knowledge of how nature works and of its diverse flora, particularly non-native plants, and also do not make a sincere effort to acquire the necessary knowledge. It is also apparently completely unknown to them that for centuries now, various plants brought here from foreign lands or introduced have become native here in Europe, and thus also here in Switzerland. They do know something about certain plant genera or species, but by no means everything they have not been able to verify. Their entire knowledge based on belief is nothing other than what has been said by human beings since time immemorial. Nothing is easier than spreading lies far and wide, yet lies have short legs, for the truth comes to light sooner or later. Those who crave power are to blame for the fact that the earth is overburdened with a 10 million strong surplus population and is being ruined by wars and schemes to encourage overpopulation. And it is idiotic and utterly irresponsible that governments are still demanding their populations urgently produce more offspring, even though the earth is already around 20 times more overpopulated than the planet is designed to sustain, which is 500 million to 530 million. This idiotic demand is no doubt rooted in the utterly depraved, superficial thinking of those in power, who, in their moral and power-hungry depravity, want more tax revenue for their own corrupt enrichment and for their murderous organizations, so that they can wage wars or at least preemptively. The planet is being plundered of its resources on many occasions for the sake of these murderous organizations, in order to manufacture weapons and other war material. This causes dangerous damage to the Earth's magnetism, also to the atmosphere, the climate, the entire natural world, and thus also its fauna and flora. However, this does not concern those in governments and authorities who indulge in a lust for power, greed for money, and avarice. For all that matters to them is the fulfillment of their lust for power and their degenerate, insane greed for a vast and immeasurable fortune, which is usually accompanied by very vile corruption. It is precisely in this context that everything leads to all manner of wrongdoing, to everything dying out, whereby, alongside the power-hungry in government, all the well-fed, like-minded individuals within the authorities do monstrous things, such as permitting or ordering that non-native flora and fauna be banned and destroyed, even though these would enrich the native genera and species. Or these unscrupulous elements within the authorities, from which, of course, the righteous are always excluded. irresponsibly order or permit farmers, etc. 2. To clear away scrub and trees, etc. near streams, on stream banks, riverbanks, and lakes, etc., even though these are vital there for a wide variety of natural life forms. This is despite the fact that nowadays the human being ought to be grateful for every leaf of a shrub, a bush, a tree, and every plant whatsoever that grows and exists, because these counteract the poisoned atmosphere, into which all manner of toxins invented by Earth humans are freely emitted, in particular CO2s, from the exhaust fumes of vehicles and chimneys of all kinds. And as for trees, these are the lungs of the earth, as is often said. For trees are of exceptional importance to all oxygen breathers, as they produce much of the oxygen necessary for all life to breathe. In this respect, they are admittedly only part of the whole, for in addition to them, there are countless genera and species of other plants which carry out precisely the same process of oxygen production through photosynthesis, by which approximately 50% of the total oxygen is produced in this way, whilst the other 50% originates from the waters and the seas. The entire process of oxygen production thus takes place through photosynthesis, which, as a vital process, converts light energy into chemical energy in trees and plants of all genera and species, also in algae and various bacteria. Furthermore, in the so-called chloroplasts in water, sunlight and carbon dioxide, CO2, are converted into glucose grape sugar, a process which forms the actual basis for the oxygen content in the atmosphere. To put it more simply, as I understand it, I am no chemist or anything. Photosynthesis is a biochemical process that takes place in the green parts of trees and other plants of all genera and species, also in certain types of bacteria, converting water, light, and carbon dioxide into sugar and oxygen. Admittedly, there are nature conservation organizations and the like that highlight and also combat the immeasurable damage caused by human beings to nature and its flora and fauna, but that costs a great deal of money, and the necessary funds must be raised from private sources. Overall, this is far too little, for a great deal would be required to do what is truly necessary so that nature, fauna, and flora could once again exist, thrive, live, and flourish as intended by creation. The truth, however, is that it is generally only those human beings who contribute to the protection, preservation of nature and its flora and fauna, who donate money that they might otherwise have to save from their own mouths, whilst those who have more than enough money stingily keep themselves completely away from any donations, and are concerned only with endlessly increasing their wealth. This is despite the fact that they themselves also can only survive on all that which, through their greed, they fail to support and allow to perish miserably. Yet neither the governments nor the many government departments and agencies, etc., finance the vital restoration of the planet, nature, and the flora and fauna. On the contrary, they even grant permission to destroy everything in nature, rendering it lifeless, to devastate it, and to exterminate the flora and fauna. They do this by granting permits to build on land, to clear forests, to build on the resulting areas, to destroy them, and to eradicate the flora, as well as to spoil and take away the fauna's habitat. This is done so that motorways, roads, playgrounds, outdoor swimming pools and tower blocks, etc., all of which serve to exacerbate overpopulation, and to encourage people to reproduce even more, and in return to collect exorbitant taxes. On the contrary, worldwide, the tax revenue that would be required for the urgently needed restoration of nature and the protection of flora and fauna is pointlessly squandered on the armament and maintenance of murderous organizations or armies, and on the wars that are waged. This is mainly under the leadership of America's deranged, sectarian dictator Trump, a despot and sectarian madman who was elected president. Also the despot and mass murderer of the State of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and in Ukraine the clown Zelensky, all three of whom are so corrupt that the rafters are bending. Of course, Putin is also to be mentioned, although he can be regarded as somewhat more moderate compared to the others. But there are also the leaders of Hezbollah, Hamas, and Yemen to mention, as well as the belligerents in the internal conflict between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, in Sudan since 2023, and all over the earth, madmen and lunatics are at the helm of governments. War also rages in Afghanistan and Pakistan, just as the civil war has been raging in Myanmar since 2021. All these power-hungry, self-serving, and madmen leading these states are constantly eager to wage murderous and destructive wars, as has been the case on Earth since time immemorial. This, instead of finally thinking and doing something sensible to create and bring about true peace, namely true peace, which is not merely proclaimed as a false peace following the end of a war, but through true humanity, absolute clarity of mind and sound reason. However, this requires not just the individual human being, but indeed the entire Earth human race, which no longer allows itself to be duped by the power-hungry posturing of all those deluded and boundlessly power-hungry individuals and their deceitful and fraudulent rhetoric, but instead reflects on reality and lives accordingly. With regard to the restoration of the planet, but particularly of nature as well as the fauna and flora, it is very important to know that, due to the Earth human's frenzy of extermination, many hundreds of thousands of genera and species have already disappeared, or at least become very rare in nature worldwide. However, it is also absolutely clear to consider and understand that, through their sheer mass of overpopulation and their criminal and all manner of nefarious machinations, Earthlings have brought nature and its fauna and flora to the brink of collapse, to such an extent that they effectively have the last straw to salvage anything at all. But it is essential to recognize this and to consciously and decisively optimize the necessary measures, and to do so immediately and swiftly, for action must be taken, as the biodiversity of flora and fauna is on the verge of disappearing for good, and the planet Earth will become as barren, desolate, and lifeless as the surface of Mars. The vast open countryside needs flower meadows, green floodplains and fields, green pastures, just as other areas must have moors, marshes, lakes, streams, and rivulets. It must not, as is foolishly demanded by idiots in state governments and authorities, etc., be filled with motorways, airfields, sports grounds, and other nonsense. And it is even more idiotic that many more blocks of flats are to be built, and that Earth humans are to be deliberately encouraged to father and bear more and more offspring. Such a concentration of stupidity and low intelligence can only stem from such intellectually bankrupt, power-hungry state leaders and other pathologically foolish individuals, who will likely never conceive of a healthy, clear, and normal mind or responsible reason, and who slink through life as mad fools. The vast majority of these fools are concerned solely with ensuring that, through the increased procreation of offspring, they will pay even more exorbitant taxes, allowing state leaders, civil servants, and members of the authorities to line their pockets with exorbitant salaries, which are often many times higher than those of working taxpayers, who, as a result of paying taxes, often have to scrape by on a pittance. Furthermore, much of the taxpayers' money is used by governments, as mentioned, to arm their state murder organizations and potentially wage war, whilst the unrighteous within the governments enrich themselves through corruption, against which the righteous are forced to remain silent, also when they become aware of the wrongdoing. The immense costs and expenses incurred by the state, running into billions and even trillions, must in turn be borne by all taxpayers, until lying down to sleep causes them pain. But now back to nature, fauna and flora. For years, nature conservation organizations, animal welfare groups, bird protection societies, and the like have been doing something, though not enough, in various countries, though not worldwide, in their attempts to help nature and its fauna and flora get back on their feet. But what is being done is merely a drop in the ocean, like one falling on a hot stone. Moreover, as a rule, everything is financed solely by private individuals, with a sense of responsibility for the relevant states and authorities, etc., shy away from their duties and contribute financially, if at all, only with meager handouts that are truly nothing more than alms. Yet the whole of this, what has been destroyed and, in part, permanently annihilated by the boundless arrogance, low intelligence, idiocy, and lust for power of the earthlings, by their wars and the insane machinations of sheer overpopulation, and what is also being done irresponsibly, costs countless billions and trillions of francs, rubles, euros, and dollars, etc., just for what is still intact and can be restored or is still halfway repairable. Yet, contrary to these vast financial resources being used sensibly for the restoration and for the protection and preservation of the remaining fauna and flora and their biodiversity, which has not yet been entirely senselessly destroyed, government administrations are foolishly squandering much of the money on their murderous organizations, their armament and wars, etc. Also on the construction of utterly pointless car tunnels and motorways, sports grounds, outdoor swimming pools, and other nonsense. Likewise, the authorities follow suit in a different manner, squandering taxpayers' money and introducing idiotic laws, rules and regulations through which private individuals are punished for doing the correct thing to protect nature and its flora and fauna and to keep them alive for the future. Taxpayers' money is effectively squandered in a foolish manner, instead of being used in accordance with reason, common sense, and utility. This includes, for example, the purification of the atmosphere, which has been maliciously poisoned by Earth humans through various toxins, such as toxic chemicals, medicines, drugs, fertilizers, industrial chimneys, domestic flues, CO2, and much more. Instead of foolishly squandering tax revenues in all manner of ways and fattening up those responsible with exorbitant salaries paid for out of taxpayers' money, it would be correct to grant these loud-mouthed and power-hungry individuals only the same salaries as the hard-working taxpayers. All these very hard-working taxpayers have to scrimp and save every penny, whilst the majority of those in power and their lackeys in offices, in government departments, etc., arrogantly regard themselves as superior and also behave accordingly towards the general public. The arrogant and power-hungry leaders of states, offices, and authorities care not in the slightest that measures should be taken against the looming further catastrophes, which are set to make matters even worse due to the ruined climate and the climate change that has been raging fiercely and maliciously for some time now, having already caused much damage, misfortune, and claimed countless lives and caused widespread destruction. Also, there is no trace of sense or reason to be found in all those power-hungry state leaders, their offices and authorities, etc., for their own well-being is far closer to their hearts than that of their peoples, who are only just good enough to pay taxes which they must earn through the sweat of their brow, yet which are squandered by the powerful and self-important leaders of state and their lackeys in various offices and authorities in a foolish and useless, indeed even harmful to the planet, the atmosphere and the climate, the biodiversity of all nature, fauna and flora, and are squandered irresponsibly, mindlessly, and schizophrenically. Now a word must be said about true peace. With regard to peace, an ancient thought of Plato has been handed down, which he mentioned in relation to the Roman Cicero, I can no longer recall it exactly as I learned it in class, but it went something like this. If you want peace, then prepare for war, but do so in such a way that you are prepared, strong, and capable of defending yourself, for only then will you be left in peace. This has been a view and a saying of Earth humans since time immemorial. They have always thought and said that only when strength and might are demonstrated and utilized can interest be asserted. To think and act in this way, however, is a vicious circle, as exemplified since time immemorial by all uprisings and wars, also by all quarrels, all strife and hatred, every act of revenge and retribution, also by all domestic revolt, every injustice, everything evil and wrong, base, shameful, unlawful, criminal, and everything inappropriate, etc. Yet this is certainly not the case, for it is certain that Plato was as wrong in his discourse. Any human being today is in holding a false view and behaving wrongly, if they share this opinion and act accordingly. The fact is that peace cannot be created through what Plato said, for this old view was fundamentally wrong. On the contrary, true peace requires healthy, modern, and rational thinking, also different and equal ways for human beings to interact with one another, which creates true transparency and honest trust. There must be no half-hearted compromises whatsoever, which benefit absolutely nothing and no one, but instead cause grave harm to interpersonal relationships. Consequently, other solutions must be sought that deviate entirely from the old ways of thinking, acting, and behaving, which have on the whole brought nothing but strife, hatred, discord, revenge, retribution, war, murder, death, ruin, and destruction. The true path to a good outcome for Earth humans is for each individual Earthling to free themselves from all forms of belief, whether religious or secular, and consequently, instead of worshiping something in deluded faith that is supposedly higher than all natural existence, such as the creation of nature, turns towards reality and lives according to its life-affirming laws and principles. The individual must move away from conventional compromise-based thinking and find integrative solutions, or rather diverse perspectives or partial perspectives. Also many human beings who can be brought together in such a way that a coherent and valuable whole emerges. The CO is therefore to incorporate all diversity into every endeavor and to exclude nothing and no one. Creating genuine peace never allows for compromise. Also not in the sense of splitting things 50-50, for if there are any crooked inconsistencies, these must be cleared away, as even the slightest uncertainties can never lead to secure peace. Unfortunately, the habit of compromise has been deeply ingrained in Earth humans since time immemorial, and consequently, this is never a way to achieve harmony and peace. The question is simply, how does the human being reach a state in which they can create transparency peacefully without being exploited, and without this being interpreted as a sign of weakness? Truly, this can happen all too quickly, leading swiftly to discord and possibly war, meaning it becomes impossible to live in peace. When deep-seated conflicts arise, sensitive peace-building efforts also only very rarely help to improve the difficult relationship between the parties to the conflict, find a common solution, and lay the foundations for peaceful coexistence. A correct long-term solution requires the ability to look far ahead, as well as a necessary and conflict-free commitment. The causes of potential conflicts must be identified at an early stage and prevented before they become acute and are able to influence decisions. Revolt must be peacefully prevented from the very outset through educational discussions, thereby avoiding escalation and enabling reconciliation as a preventive measure before it becomes urgently necessary. It is necessary to continuously analyze every peace effort to ensure that conflicts do not develop, for it is vital to the peace concept that this process can become increasingly intensive, as only in this way will any aggressiveness gradually diminish. This alone prevents the emergence of violent, negotiation-related uprisings, political conflicts, quarrels, other malicious disputes, strife, hatred, jealousy, acts of revenge, and the urge for retribution. Instead, such outbursts can be avoided or progressively weakened and ultimately rendered completely null and void. However, the entire process of achieving peace in this regard necessitates, to a large extent, that persons who have succumbed to the lust for power, the pursuit of power, and to arrogance and selfishness must, from the very outset of the peace talks, be rebuked in such a way that their pretensions in this regard receive no attention whatsoever. Rather, there must be absolutely free, all-encompassing, and genuine efforts towards peace, free from displays of power, etc., of absolute correctness, and free from absolutely any demands for separate rules and wishes, etc. Peace truly means peace, and requires no separate special conditions whatsoever. True peace denotes an absolute state that is free from any arising differences, and absolutely free from specific agreements, rules, guidelines, and wishes, etc. And indeed, this is to be upheld between individuals who know one another, or are foreign to one another, in friendships, in marriages as well as families, schools, clubs, companies and organizations, and of course also between states, and in the coexistence of human beings in every way whatsoever. Effective peace is based on genuine, positive coexistence, and on the fulfillment of peace obligations in every respect, also including the observance of customs and traditions, which are generally deeply rooted in the culture of a people and its human beings, passed down through many generations, and represent rules of conduct and traditions. Customs, etc., are general moral norms of a society, such as decency, courtesy, manners and etiquette, etc., whilst customs are concrete and visible actions, such as rituals, guidelines, etc., which, together with customs, constitute the identity of persons, as they also lend a certain structure to their daily lives, bring order to their lives, and establish rules, rights, and laws. True peace, it must be said, is based on absolute nonviolence, whilst true peace is also based on positive evolution of consciousness, and is inseparably linked to the thoughts and feelings of equality, and the right of all human beings to be equal amongst one another. In true peace, there reigns tranquility, security, and justice prevail, and no conflicts of any kind arise, because fundamentally, everything is avoided, and everything is discussed, before any disturbances to the peace can emerge. Conflicts are absolutely not necessary components of human being coexistence, nor are they a catalyst for positive change. It is also wrong to allow conflicts to arise, for only in this way can an escalation be prevented. In politics in particular, therefore, pursuing a policy of peace means eliminating the causes of discord before they can arise, which, however, requires a sound and clear mind and equally sound reason. And it must be said that this also applies in private life, in every marriage, in every family, in every friendship, and every form of coexistence, as well as in clubs and organizations, etc. To this end, however, it is also necessary to regulate the fair distribution of all natural and vital resources, which must be taken into account to ensure that equality is established for absolutely all human beings in this regard as well, so that no such stark disparities in prosperity arise as to create a gap leading to envy and hostility. And this must be the case both nationally and globally, in such a way that the oppression of social minorities can never arise, nor can even the slightest violation of human rights. In this regard, it is also urgently necessary that, through the own intellect and reason of every single earth human, female and male, people refrain from producing offspring in an uncontrolled manner. It is necessary for every single human being to focus on reducing the 10 billion strong humanity through a controlled halt to births to the normal level of 500 million and at most 530 million, which is beneficial for Earth so that they no longer destroy the planet and nature, but rather that it can thrive, live, and exist alongside them and the entire fauna and flora, of which the human being is also a part, without any problems whatsoever. It is the responsibility of every Earth human to disregard all the criminal and even criminal nonsense of the idiotic rulers and their lackeys, who criminally and vehemently urge their peoples to create and bear more and more offspring. This is because the criminal aim is to ensure that these offspring will then pay far more taxes, which are used for nonsensical purposes, and to arm the state's murderous organizations or armies, and through which wars may then be waged, leading to the destruction of the natural foundations of life. True, lasting peace means that hostilities cannot arise or occur as a result of any circumstances or events, such as disorder or injustice, nor can unrest be provoked either privately or within a country, and no feuds, gov-vault strife, hatred, war, conflict, or vigilantism, etc., can come into being. True peace is a universal state among all human beings, namely across all social groups, in marriages and families, friendships, circles of acquaintances, organizations, firms, corporations, and states. In all these, conflicts must be avoided from the outset. Yet if, for whatever reason, conflict situations do arise, they must be resolved and remedied through reason and common sense at the very earliest stages, without any verbal or physical Ausartungen. If necessary, this must be carried out in accordance with legally established standards, and without any gov-vault, Ausartung, or dispute, but consistently through the application of decency, reason, and common sense, and without any verbal or physical aggression. This is a behavior to be learnt, and, in every respect, a state of affairs between individual human beings, all groups of human beings, organizations, races, and all peoples of all states, regardless of their skin color, faith, social class, etc. In this regard, no persons whatsoever, neither female nor male, who have succumbed to the lust for power, the craving for power, and self-importance should be permitted to hold positions in the leadership of states, administrations, and authorities, or their representative bodies, nor in any political leadership, political structure, or party preference. This will, to the greatest extent possible, preclude the realization of certain aspirations in the form of unrest, particularly uprisings, war, or rebellion. The formulation of these aforementioned and valuable guidelines should be established as a fixed rule and strictly observed, for they ensure that all human beings may live together in peace and security, also a state of order, peace and freedom for human beings within their own country, a state of order, peace, independence, and inviolability of states, a state of freedom of belief for all human beings, and a state of absolute security for all human beings within their own state. Furthermore, this also establishes the estate of equality of all human beings and all life, as well as a state of inner freedom for truly effective, correct, and uninfluenced decisions, and a state of all-encompassing connection with all human beings, nature, and its entire fauna and flora. And, last but not least, a state of all-encompassing justice, whose principles are freedom and unity, which only lead to true justice through their realization. Peace can only arise when the human beings of the earth learn to resolve the first stirrings of conflict, the moment they are perceived in a completely nonviolent and constructive manner, and to bring about positive change from them. True peace is far more than merely the absence of aggression. Strife, hatred, quarreling, revenge, retribution, and war. Indeed, genuine and lasting peace is defined as a permanent state of absolute nonviolence, interpersonal, and social justice, also based on reason. Reason and honest trust, also on genuine and true human rights, and on the recognition and management of emerging conflicts before they can escalate and become acute, so that they can then be painstakingly resolved through constructive conflict resolution. If not, one wonders whether this will even be possible at all. If a conflict is recognized and resolved at its very inception, this brings about a positive fundamental aspect of peace that already seals the overcoming of structural G-volt before it can even emerge and become a reality. This not only creates security and a prior reconciliation of all parties before these can be called into question, and aggression can arise. In this way, peace is created through dialogue and the early resolution and prevention of conflicts, precisely because before conflict situations, injustice, disputes, strife, or hatred, etc., can arise, they are nipped in the bud before they emerge. And the fact is that sustainable peace requires this, and conflict management must already be addressed when the first signs of a conflict are recognized and dealt with immediately. This is particularly important in negotiations between states, and thus in international cooperation, in order to work towards strengthening democracy and human rights. This is required not of negotiating partners who have succumbed to a lust for power, a craving for dominance, or selfishness, but of absolutely calm and self-controlled local actors, with clear minds and sound judgment, who are capable of managing the entire process of upcoming conferences in a wise and peaceful manner. Only when human beings are able to enjoy dignified living conditions, also to live by them, and to experience effective justice, can peace develop within them personally in the long term, and enable them to project this peace outwards. Yet strife, conflict, hatred, revenge, lies, deceit, and retaliation, as well as G-volt and war, very often make this nearly or completely impossible for human beings. Consequently, the necessary conditions for creating peaceful coexistence are denied them from the outset. The whole situation is a veritable vicious circle, which can only be broken by the protection of a special armor, and which can give life a sense of peace. This, however, requires a personal realization of reality and its truth, as well as, in politics, a forward-looking, honest pursuit of peace. This, however, is only found in persons who are free from any lust for power, any striving for power, and even the slightest hint of selfishness, self-importance, demands, lies, verbal deceit, and insults. Unfortunately, this is not the case with those obsessed with power, who, driven by a lust for power, sit at the helm of state leaderships, etc., nor is it the case with politicians who are not obsessed with power, for their entire mindset is precisely the opposite. It is therefore essential that this be recognized by every human being and by all peoples as a whole, just as it is essential to recognize that sustainable social, ecological, and economic development is inextricably linked to true peace, and that only through this, if it is effectively maintained, will everything have lasting stability in the future. Any sustainable and peace-oriented development prevents the emergence of conflicts. However, the development and production of weapons, etc., of any kind for violent or warlike purposes, etc., should ever take place. Weapons of such diverse kinds inevitably give rise to conflicts through a pernicious interplay of the most varied factors, which are invariably brought about and implemented in a destructive manner by those who are power-hungry, power-obsessed, self-aggrandizing and selfish, and thus, without exception, by irresponsible persons. Peace, however, can never be created or achieved through violence, not even through armed force or by bringing a war to an end, for what comes about in this way is not and never will be true peace, but rather through govvault, murder, destruction, and coercion. Nothing more than a ceasefire, a halting of fire and a truce, or a suspension of hostilities, which is, however, only temporary and dependent on the defeated party not taking up arms again. Should this happen, the false peace is immediately revoked, and the war, with all its killing and destruction, resumes anew, remaining far removed from true, effective peace. Weapons and military interventions can never force or bring about true peace, but, as explained, only a patchwork of a false peace, which in every respect rests solely on the goodwill and ill will of the victorious party, and destroys everything that constitutes the effective foundations for true peace. And there is ample evidence of this worldwide. True peace must be created within oneself through the understanding and reason of every single human being, and must therefore grow from within. To this end, it is necessary for human beings to consciously create the inner conditions through which they respect all human rights, and the diversity of human orientations of every kind, is participatory and compassionate in its interest in the welfare and suffering of fellow human beings, and nurtures and cares for what is necessary, also granting every human being equal opportunities and justice, and consciously striving to ensure that these values are promoted and nurtured throughout the human community. The truly great challenges of the past millennia, that is, of history, were often marked by wars, with the First World War of 1756 to 1763 making its appearance in modern times, a conflict which is still disputed today and trivialized as the 7 Years' War. Then came the Second World War, from 1914 to 1918, and the Third World War, from 1939 to 1945, as well as the many wars since then, mainly in the eastern part of the planet Earth, and also in the present day, where the war in Ukraine is being waged, directed by the war-hungry Ukrainian President Zelensky, a clown and actor by profession, yet was started by Putin, the Russian president, because U.S. President Biden wanted the murderous organizations of the USA and NATO to establish themselves in Ukraine, though this is falsely portrayed otherwise by America and Zelensky. But there is also the ongoing Israel-Gaza-Lebanon-Iran war, whose chief conductor is the mass murderer Netanyahu, who also attacked Iran, formerly Persia, with missiles, together with Trump, the hegemonic American president, who terrorizes many states worldwide and acts as if he were the king of the world. Unfortunately, this is exactly as Foth and I foresaw in the 1940s, and as we have experienced, that from the 1950s onwards, the future would begin to take a very grim turn. This is due to the powerful and power-hungry, as well as the selfish and self-important among the world's rulers, and the growing indifference and irresponsibility of the peoples, as well as the emergence of AI technology, which will take the helm of Earth humans. In the future, everything will change for the worse very rapidly, and there will be ever-increasing global inequalities, also ever more tyrannical machinations by those in power and their lackeys in their offices and authorities, the financial institutions and murderous organizations, etc., who will act so insidiously against the populations that they are to be gradually and completely deprived of their personal freedom and independence. The peoples are to be disenfranchised in the face of the powerful and self-serving nature of all those in power. The populations will only become aware of this through the emerging indifference and irresponsibility, when it is too late and all is lost, leaving them unable to do anything about it once they recognize the evil. Climate change, the increasingly blatant destruction of the environment, the destruction of the planet through the irresponsible exploitation of the Earth's resources, and the resulting damage to the Earth's magnetism, along with the devastating impact this has on nature and the extinction of many life forms of fauna and flora, are factors that cannot be remedied to such an extent that the former good state can be restored. To make matters worse, the Earth's raw materials are becoming increasingly scarce, which Earthlings exploit irresponsibly and to excess due to greed and overpopulation, automatically leading to violent conflicts and wars, a mindset shared by the effectively deranged American president dictator King Trump, who seeks to seize all the nations of the world through war and other forms of evil goval. This applies particularly to those nations possessing valuable natural resources. Consequently, the risks of hostility are increasing ever more, and existing conflicts are escalating, constantly fueled anew by greed for raw materials and the like. The fact that the Israeli mass murderer is still aiding the American dictator Trump, particularly with regard to Iran, which is being bombed and destroyed by missiles from the American and Israeli murderous organizational armies, costing America around $12 to $14 billion a day, with the cheapest missile costing around $1.5 million, and the most expensive around $13 million. Like the American dictator Trump and the mass murderer Netanyahu, the warmonger and Ukrainian clown Zelensky is no better. He now seeks to curry favor with the Arab states, having already achieved success in this regard by signing a comprehensive defense and technology cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia at the end of March 2026. As has been ascertained from his mindset, he hopes to make a big name for himself in the Balkan states as an advisor and supplier of defensive drones, etc. Compared to these three, Russian President Putin appears like a shadow who lost his nerve as a result of the efforts and threats of the senile and insecure American President Biden, who was determined to station the murderous organization NATO in Ukraine. Biden's efforts served as Putin's justification for carrying out an invasion and allowing the Russian murderous organization to march into Ukraine on the morning of the 24th of February 2022, simultaneously from the north, south, and east. So he was the instigator and leader of the war against Ukraine. Yet this truth, how everything really was from the outset, is deceitfully denied by all the politicians across the West involved in the whole affair, and the blame is placed solely on Russia, or rather Putin. This is also done by all those idiotic rulers, mainly those of America and Europe, who are constantly and irresponsibly supplying weapons, ammunition, and money to Zelensky and the corrupt Ukrainian regime, thereby allowing the war to continue, and enabling the particularly corrupt Zelensky to enrich himself privately. Consequently, in his lust for war, he is not interested in seeing it ended. Were it not for all this, everything would have been over after barely 3 months, and there would never have been years of murder, rape, and destruction. Consequently, all those supplying weapons, ammunition, and money are effectively to blame for the murder of tens of thousands of human beings, the rape of many women and girls, the killing of children, and the immense destruction wrought. All this, alongside the fact that war-hungry mercenaries and the like, from practically all over Europe, and from non-European countries, are indulging their murderous passion in Ukraine with a lust for blood, a fact which is, however, widely kept under wraps. Yet Russia is cursed and condemned because North Koreans and Africans are operating there as mercenary murderers. And how idiotic and biased are all those who, without exception, always take a positive stance on Ukraine, yet, conversely, wave the evil, hate-filled banner against Russia. They are so sick in the head that they cannot recognize why the railing is directed solely against Russia, that the whole of this hatred is deliberately fabricated by all of them, and also vehemently driven by elements who do not want peace in the world because it prevents them from realizing their power-hungry behavior and their lust for power, their utterly ruthless selfishness, and all that is evil and misanthropic, as programmed into their wretched character by their own upbringing. This is something all those who, due to their low intelligence, harbor hatred and rage in their hearts cannot comprehend. Consequently, they lose all sense of objectivity, responsibility, and truth, and are thus able to display their utterly wretched character to the outside world. A character fundamentally geared towards murder and manslaughter, hatred and depravity, as is characteristic of those with Nazi sympathies. This forward-looking policy does not aim for world peace. Indeed, it will cause the Earth's human beings to multiply globally, and, instead of bringing about a good and respectable common good, will bring evil discord and state and financial enslavement, whilst all the foundations of life will continue to deteriorate in the future. Thus, the future will bring many new conflicts. In particular, this is because the underprivileged social class comprises many human beings, and will comprise ever more who slip into criminality and delinquency, committing criminal and delinquent acts and deeds, such as fraud and destruction, robbery, theft, burglary, muggings, and increasingly severe gov-vault, right up to murder and mass murder. This will also be done by ruthless killers. The power-hungry, the power-obsessed, and the self-centered within governments, heads of state, and their lackeys in government offices and authorities, etc. And there will be others who are morally ausarted by nature, because they have trained themselves to be so, and are acting out this self-imposed behavior, namely by harassing and oppressing the population and individual citizens. The truth is that around 2/3 of all extremely poor human beings do not even live in houses with a roof over their heads, but on the streets and in countries that are often characterized by vicious gov-vault. Efforts to combat poverty and help those living in need there consistently fall on barren ground. Over the past few years, some attempts at aid have indeed been made, yet the minimal progress towards improvement that was achieved has since been undone by recurring and rapidly escalating conflicts. Peacefulness, efforts towards peace and true peace, are the result of a wholesome state of inner calm and tranquility within the human being, which they are able to cultivate into a valuable virtue within their character. This enables them, in a wise manner, to live together, both internally and with others, in harmony, tranquility, equality, and security, and consequently to coexist with fellow human beings without insults, gov-vault, strife, hatred, quarrels, as well as lies, deceit, and slander, etc. Likewise, true peace is also characterized by the absence of domestic violence, and the absence of all forms of social violence, etc., as well as the absence of any cultural or structural violence, as well as the absence of exploitative, repressive, or punitive structures of violence against life and limb. All private life, also every aspect of civic life, public life, and state life, and every form of human coexistence, whether in pairs, in families, in groups, in communities, or in organizations, etc., must be characterized by harmony and free from status, struggles, and friction. True peace must always be defined in positive terms and is to be understood as a capacity that knows no conflict whatsoever. Consequently, it is based on thoughts, feelings, and emotions that create empathy, and thus a disposition which harbors within itself the willingness and ability to empathize with the attitude, disposition, and mentality, etc., thereby resolving and settling every form of violence, every dispute, quarrel, and hatred, etc., in an almost playful and creatively wise manner before they become acute. The true fact is that the foundation of peace is a state of preventing the emergence of, and not becoming entangled in, factors that are brought under control before they become acute and can lead to disputes. And finally, I have the following to say. Conflict management, when it arises, is an effective alternative for thinking sensibly and independently, and for also effectively and fully consciously reflecting upon and processing everything that arises. True peace means that there are no conflicts, but rather that these are fundamentally dealt with as soon as they arise, so that they cannot become acute. If peace is to be effectively established, then the only way is for human beings to learn this and live by it. Consequently, one must learn to avoid conflicts at their very source and not allow them to become acute, so that they remain nonviolent. This is, however, only possible if they are identified at their source, dealt with constructively and correctly, and everything is transformed into similar changes through positive thoughts. The human being's own and, most urgently, extremely early conflict management involves an extremely broad diplomatic spectrum, encompassing a great many nonviolent methods, which, when dealing with conflicts, are humanely soothing and peace-promoting, and which can also be utilized in politics. And if these are actually utilized, and can also be anchored institutionally as existing approaches to solutions that promote peace, then everything will turn out perfectly well. In fact, conflicts are not a necessary part of the coexistence of human beings, as know-it-all psychologists and other know-it-alls and so-called experts erroneously and foolishly claim. Conflicts are absolutely not necessary and are not a cause for social change, but are, as a rule, always at least a reason for verbal Aussattungen, and thus, at least for a developing situation of insults, arguments, and the threat of physical or any other kind of Gewalt. It is therefore essential to ensure that the first signs of emerging conflicts are consciously recognized at the very outset through constant vigilance and, rather than being suppressed, are analyzed with absolute calm and without any emotional influence, and dealt with peacefully and without any agitation before they can break out in an acute negative manner. If, as a result of wrong thinking, emotional reactions, and a failure to control negative emotions, it appears to a human being that it is impossible to avoid conflicts entirely, this is unconsciously based on self-deception, for conflicts of every kind can be effectively avoided in every instance and under all circumstances. This is because, for if reason and common sense are consciously maintained and calm is preserved, which is certainly difficult, yet achievable through the conscious cultivation of quiet, serene, peaceful, level-headed, tranquil and all-balancing thoughts, feelings and emotions, then a state of mind is expressed through the relaxation of the entire personality. This manifests itself through composure, prudence, equanimity, self-control, even stoicism, also in inner balance and calmness, and in strong nerves, passivity in conflict and silence. This ensures absolutely that neither Gewalt, strife, hatred, nor even war can arise or undergo an Ausartung. This is not because, if mental, emotional, and psychological calm is maintained, then everything can be kept absolutely under control. Preventing a potential violent escalation requires a spirit of peacefulness, which means that the causes of discord must be eliminated before they can manifest. This includes, both in private and political spheres, any unjust distribution of natural resources, also including stark private and political disparities in wealth, which must be understood in both national and global terms. Consequently, any form of oppression of human beings, also of groups, associations, organizations, or social minorities, must be absolutely avoided. Consequently, no violation of human rights of any kind or manner, nor any form of destruction, must ever take place, particularly with regard to the natural foundations of life, as well as nature, its fauna and flora, and, of course, the planet Earth itself. Finally, the following is to be said. The future of planet Earth and its humanity is now at stake. For, if we do not succeed in the next few years in eliminating and remedying the greatest part of all evils, and doing so for all time to come, then there will be nothing left but a last-minute scramble and a do-or-die situation, in such a way that absolutely everything necessary is done as demanded by the severely devastated remnants of life, the drastically reduced humanity, and the entirety of nature on this planet, whereby survival can be guaranteed. Only that which is then aligned with the complete correctness of nature, the planet, and all that is positive within the order established by creation, and which is inherent to these, will be what can still be done. It will be recommended that all evils be truly resolved and vanish, and these are strife, all wars and quarrels, discord and hatred, crime and all criminal acts, the entire most grievous pollution of land, mountains and water, the destruction of land, the destruction of moors, marshes and also deserts, the destruction of water bodies and forests, the destruction of the planet, and the destruction of nature. Also to be mentioned is the eradication of fauna and flora, as well as their habitats, which must likewise be abolished and brought to an end, just as the unconditional reduction of overpopulation through a radical halt to births is indispensable, as is the elimination of all environmental pollution of every kind, particularly from CO2 emissions from motor vehicles, also from the chimneys of companies and corporations, etc., and from smoke emissions caused by the burning of forests and all manner of toxic materials, etc. This is in addition to the fact that we must very quickly put an end to the continued poisoning of the entire natural world and its fauna and flora on land and in water with toxins of all kinds, as well as the extermination of vast swathes of the vitally important insect world through various toxins, which also leads to the destruction and extermination of many species of aquatic life. This, once again, alongside the fact that genera of small, medium, and large soil-dwelling creatures, earth-dwelling creatures, as well as those of the air and all species of the avian world, also include small, medium, and large land-dwelling creatures of all genera and species, and likewise forest-dwelling creatures, mountain-dwelling creatures, and aquatic creatures suffer greatly from these toxins, fall ill, and then die. Toxins of all kinds are used by the ton worldwide in agriculture, in large-scale horticulture, as well as privately for gardening and other purposes, and also contaminate many other things, such as through weed control, car washing, and for cleaning a wide variety of items. But we must also mention air fresheners, toilet deodorants, and all manner of other products, which ultimately also pollute the atmosphere and drinking water, and, alongside human beings, poison all life forms in nature, causing them to perish. And only when all this is finally curtailed and the number of Earth humans is effectively reduced through a worldwide long-term and strictly controlled birth control, can a planet like Earth sustain such a population and feed and support it without difficulty? And this, in turn, can only be achieved through the correct and good actions of Earthlings, who can then look to the future again with a good conscience. Only in this way does humanity still have a chance to save itself, the planet, its nature, fauna and flora, and all remaining genera and species of life forms. And truly, this will only be the case through these sustainable measures. In this regard, every single human being must always do the correct thing, also with regard to AI or artificial intelligence, ensuring that Earth humans do not idolize it, turn it into a religion, or become dependent on it in any other way. Artificial intelligence is being used to create androids, which, through self-development, will become a might against which humanity will have to defend itself. The very first steps towards this have already been successfully taken and implemented. Consequently, the humanity will have to deal with this one way or another in the future, to enable a better future for all human beings. As the present state of affairs is generally in an extremely poor condition, it is essential that true peace be established on Earth, for without peace, none of the necessary goals can be achieved. It is therefore necessary that all required efforts to resolve and prevent conflicts worldwide be tirelessly pursued through clear thinking and sound reason in order to bring about the creation of truly effective peace. In doing so, it is essential for human beings to grasp clear and peaceful thinking, as well as the clear perception and recognition of the truth of peace, for this is an extremely important behavior that encompasses all the processes of the creative life energetic consciousness and its unconscious within the brain of a human being. Through this higher consciousness and unconscious, everything necessary is instinctively transferred to the human being's physical subconscious and consciousness, and through this, they also learn attention and language. This is how they also learn other cognitive abilities, such as remembering various things, solving problems, and being able to help themselves in many matters and situations, as well as taking in direct information from their immediate surroundings, and also indirectly from near or far, in order to process everything and use it appropriately, and thereby to steer their behavior correctly. Musée Silver Star Center, 3rd April 2026, Billy.
I also think that perhaps some human beings will reflect on my thoughts, and in doing so, find answers to any questions that may be on their minds and troubling them.
I think that will be the case, for you have written much that is of great interest to the human beings who are mentally engaged with all that you have mentioned.
That would please me, and I am sure that other human beings will see and understand it in the same way as I do.
That will be the case. Now, however, I would like to ask you something you have never spoken of before, something which we, Pata, Semiaze, Bermunda, and Jana, Florina, and I, have now come across in the annals of my grandfather Svath, because, in accordance with his authorization, we have only now been permitted to listen to and examine his relevant records.
Aha, and what is this mysterious thing? There was actually nothing hidden that needed to be kept secret.
Apparently there was, because you were the one who suffered and obviously were not meant to be reminded of it, at least not until you had reached years, and not an Earth age of 89 years, as a result of all your absences from the present time here on Earth.
You speak in riddles, and I do not understand what you are trying to say. Also, I do not recall that Svath and I had agreed on anything that was to be kept secret.
That decision was made by him alone. As his annals show, he alone decided on it. And that was certainly good, as we all say. You have obviously forgotten these events because you...
I am sure I have forgotten this and that, but that's only natural, especially as one gets older. But, my friend, you are making me curious.
I wonder if I am doing the correct thing by talking about this?
Certainly not, and it is also not the end of the world.
If it really is your wish that I say something, but do not be alarmed.
Yes, of course. Just let us see whether it blows me away or not.
All right, then so be it, because it is not easy for me.
Go on then. Just say what is on your mind.
Good. Mrs. Horat, she has been mentioned often enough. But well, do you still remember the cult members Mrs. Bonenblust and the two 17-year-olds Rita Pavoni and Sanji Galetti?
Now it is coming back. Yes, I really have not thought about that once in my whole life. It was simply too much for me. I just buried it all and forgot. And today, well, it does not matter anymore. What is past and simply forgotten. But now that you have brought the memory back to me, the whole thing comes back to mind. But actually, I have erased everything from my memory and not just repressed it. Consequently, I also have not thought about it since, even though ever since then, at any time of day or night, I see this shared tattoo of Horat and Bonenblast on my arm when I look at it. Nor do I think of the other two tattoos, of those two young brats, Rita Pavoni and Sonia Galletti, when I...
That's certainly true, but it is part of your life. We all think it should be recorded in writing. It should at least be noted in your CV. So, Bernadette,
I will have to think about that first, because I do not think it is important.
but we see it differently because that is something that
Does not bother me. It happened, and I have come to terms with it and erased the memory of it, which is why it also does not bother me now that Svath has told you this and you now know. But I do think that the whole thing should not be brought up again now.
but it is something very significant in your life.
That's true, but I thought it through sensibly and have digested it all. Consequently, I have got over it, and have not let it ruin my life, as many others do who dwell on it their whole lives.
That's probably correct, but the fact that Sonia Galletti,
I did not know that, because the whole Galletti family did not live in Niederflachs or in Bulach, though Sonia often stayed with Horat during the holidays. Besides, she went back abroad with her parents, though I do not know where that was. The sectarian Horat lived in the second flat above Louise Meier, and the alcoholic Bonenblust, who was in the same sect, was a tenant in the flat above Stundler Mag. I was also born in that large farmhouse, which used to belong to my paternal grandmother, but which she sold cheaply to Mag. Rita Pavoni lived about 500 meters from Niederflachs on Kazernanstrasse.
my grandfather also mentioned that.
Good. Then we do not need to talk about it anymore, because it really is not worth talking about.
But do think about whether you should not tell Bernadette everything.
Yes, I will. And I will think it over. Then I have something here that is, once again, more than just very strange. On the 30th of March, I was reclining on the sofa watching a film on the TV, when suddenly I was simply gone, and knew nothing more. That was a moment when I still remember a specific sequence from the film. It was exactly 14:07 when I was suddenly back again, and I was sitting in the middle of the sofa, and heard a knock at the door, whereupon Madeline came in when I called out and asked me something. When I answered her, I suddenly felt something in my mouth, so I fumbled around and pulled these two hairs out of my mouth. Look here. I have stuck them onto this piece of paper, and as you can see, they are barely visible because they are thinner than a human hair. I have never seen hairs like this before, and I wonder where they suddenly came from in my mouth. Madeline and I could really only see them because I held them up to the light. I also later showed the piece of paper with the hairs to Bernadette and Bridget, and they too saw that they were thinner than human hair. So I would like to ask you now if you could make an effort and get to the bottom of this?
As I can see, the hairs are really very thin, and I've never seen any like them before. Yes, I will do my best and try to find out more. Strange, really very strange.
Exactly. Could you perhaps try going back and seeing if you can find out anything?
I will do that, because I am also interested. The whole thing is really strange.
Good. Then I will be happy to be surprised by what you manage to find out and might actually discover. But here, I have now written this short article in response to having recently looked at an article from my youth, about which I think there is still quite a bit that needs to be said and explained in more detail. I have now elaborated on this somewhat, though I am not referring to my youthful work here, but have written something independent of it. So listen to $per 2 offer.
Vitalizing creation energy.
How I learned and was able to witness for myself at Svath through a kind of extremely modern microscope. How life began to emerge from matter, and how a kind of biological cell arose from the elements of matter, from rock and minerals, etc. There I learned that matter is not dead. At that time, I was able to discover that originally only the most diverse kinds of matter existed, and that every form of matter is alive. And I can describe this as entirely normal and not as a rarity for many billions of years ago, when there really was no biological life yet. Various supposedly dead matter began to create biological life, which began to breathe and live. Consequently, right from the very beginning, matter contained within itself a certain something akin to a seed of life. That is, the first hint of the origin of biological life, provided it harbored that decisive spark from which biological organic life could develop and also did unfold. Yet, according to a scientifically absurd assertion, matter is supposedly dead. In a special apparatus, I observed that hard and supposedly lifeless matter, as earthly science claims, did indeed produce primitive yet effectively biological organic life in the form of a cell. Once again, the beginning was effectively a kind of biological cell that gained growth, potential, and vitality, and which formed the origin of a seed of the becoming of biological life. Life thus emerged from the supposedly dead matter, as this matter breathed life into a germ cell that had emerged from it. Something like a breath, an ether, or an energy that was an impulse, causing the cell to begin to act. Svoth explained to me that the first cells on Earth also emerged in this way, and that they subsequently developed in very rare pools of water, but later in larger bodies of water. These primordial cells were able to absorb energy and power from their surroundings in order to develop the capacity and ability to reproduce and organize themselves. If I am now to explain what life is, I can only describe it in the way Svoth explained it to me. The phenomenon of life begins, in a sense, as a functioning germ cell, specifically as a transition from solid matter to some form of living biological primordial cell. Svoth explained that the solid matter was something like a solid primordial brew, a solid potage or stew, containing all the necessary ingredients for the creation of biological life. This means that a great many individual types of primordial components with numerous properties and individual parts with functions were present and could interact with one another. Properties and functions which I assume are completely unknown to modern science. There were likely many components from which mitochondria developed. The powerhouses of the cells, so to speak, through which cell walls could form. As Svoth explained, there were also amino acids, molecules, etc., also many other components from which DNA formed, and so on. And the most important thing of all was that every single one of these tiny particles, from which biological life emerged from matter that was effectively not dead but living and solid, was thus effectively animated, just as absolutely everything and everyone that exists is animated. And effectively, everything and every existential entity is animated by an energy appropriately proportioned to its nature, namely through the life-giving creation energy. And this energy is endowed with a natural, appropriate, and corresponding force, depending on whether it is matter or biological life. Thus, contrary to the false scientific truth, so-called dead solid matter exists through life-giving creation energy, just as every form of biological life can live through the life-giving creation energy. And in the entire creation, nothing at all can exist unless it is animated by the life-giving creation energy, whereby this and all forms of creation energy as such cannot be identified and thus cannot be found, nor can they be seen or detected by mechanical or any other technical means. Life-giving creation energy can neither be produced nor destroyed by human beings or any other beings of any kind. Energy in general also cannot be dissolved by human beings. However, in its active form, it is alterable. The life-giving creation energy is what earthly scientists have been searching for since time immemorial, namely the actual life through which all living things are animated. But this cannot be found, for this very life is, in fact, the life-giving creation energy. Yet this energy, as life, is not visibly located in a specific place within matter or in the bodies of biological life forms. Rather, it is distributed throughout all matter or throughout the entire body of a biological life form. In life forms exhibiting a higher or lower form of physical consciousness and subconsciousness. In human beings or human-like, human equivalent beings, animals, creatures, and countless lower and even the lowest life forms. Further aspects of the innumerable creation energies are present, such as the evolutionary creation life energy, which is situated in a specific area of the brain or brain-like structure, and through which every life form endowed with it can evolve. Depending on its genus and species, consciously, instinctively, impulsively, emotionally, or even in a state of absolute unconsciousness. The human being, like other entities, etc., is unable to fathom even a spark of the life-giving creation energy, for this cannot be grasped or fathomed in any way, either instrumentally or by other technical means, and life is attributable exclusively to it alone. And indeed, no components can be isolated and fixed in a test tube to generate new life from them. For also when new life arises through innovations, such as mutations, revivals of life forms created by the human being, then in every single case, conditions existing within creation are always required, such as bones, plants, blood or tissue, etc., also chemical substances, matter or other elements. In all things, there was life-giving creation energy during their lifetime, whereby their image can be used after death to recreate something similar chemically or also by other means, such as through certain forms of DNA which can be preserved for a long time, even millions of years in fossils, because these are forms that exist in terms of energy. They may well be altered, but cannot be destroyed. Life is life-giving creation energy and consumes energy. However, life also requires self-organization and self-regulation, which means that, for example, every cell living through the life-giving creation energy controls all its processes in such a way that everything runs absolutely perfectly, precisely because it is founded in creational energy. All the processes of life in every genus and species are coordinated by the life-giving creation energy, so that everything follows its natural course. Yet the human being, through his primitive degeneracy, foolishly disrupts this, thereby causing immense Ausartungen and calamity that is scarcely, if at all, reparable. In many cases, through his primitive, superficial thinking and actions, he thereby causes nothing but chaos and destruction and fails to abide by the rules of life, which are clearly discernible in the natural world and demonstrate that nature is to be cherished and nurtured, not destroyed. And all the protein building blocks of every cell in a tissue must also adhere to this order prescribed by the creation, whereby the collective overall state of the whole can effectively function in a self-organizing manner. If then all life is now considered as a whole, which is absolutely given solely through the creation energy, it becomes apparent that all of this is self-organizing, yet in accordance with creational principles and life-sustaining, that is to say, the exact opposite of what the Earth human engages in criminally and even maliciously. And so only one question remains. When will the Earthling finally break free from the structure of his malicious, murderous, destructive, and idiotic behavior and become a wise and true human being? When will he finally create true peace and order within himself, on the planet, and amongst all peoples, without murderous organized armies and wars, power-hungry and power-obsessed individuals, arrogant and selfish state leaders, also their lackeys and authorities, crime, criminals, and those greedy for wealth, etc. These are all fundamental principles that play a decisive role. The life and existence of humanity can only truly function correctly when people live righteously, and everything is done righteously. This also applies to life, specifically in relation to the life-giving creation energy through which everything functions correctly. Its entire blueprint in all living cells, and thus also in all genetic material via the DNA, through which everything is controlled and regulated and life is guaranteed for as long as the human being values and honors it and nurtures and cares for it accordingly. Semyeze Silver Star Center, the 1st of April 2026, Billy.
As usual, you speak clearly. Yet somehow the whole thing reminds me.
Well, that may be. For recently I was looking at a record from Svav's Annals, dated 1950 or thereabouts.
You should tell me.
I will when you come back next time.
You can. But wait a moment. Unfortunately, I must go, for I am being called. Goodbye, Edward, my friend.
Well then, goodbye, Quetzal.
Excerpts from the correspondence. 18 by Bernadette Brand.
Also for human beings who are deeply engaged with the creation energy teaching and who make a great effort to understand everything correctly. It is not easy to come to terms with the new terminology that Billy has been introducing, along with the accompanying explanations, for some time now. These problems stem primarily from the fact that Billy could not immediately come out with all the new and now truly correct terms, because the understanding and intellectual capacity of most learners would not have allowed them to grasp the reality of the teaching, since this is so far removed from everything found in earthly cultures, and so-called earthly spiritual life are so far removed that they appear merely confusing at first glance and upon initial contact. The following serves as one of many examples.
Question. Over the last few days, I have been reflecting on the terms subconscious and unconscious. It is clear to me that the unconscious is purely creative energetic, and thus only positive or neutrally positive. Balanced elements are stored there, and these transmit impulses to the material subconscious. However, the teaching letters, including teaching letter 154, also speak of several forms of the unconsciouses. At first, I did not know what to make of this. I then began to think that the creational unconscious is, after all, always immaterial and cannot therefore be easily divided into forms. So the unconscious is presumably active in providing impulses in many different ways, which can then be seen as various forms of the unconscious. Am I correct in my assumptions, or am I completely off track in imagining this far too simplistically?
Answer. It is correct that the unconscious is purely of a creative energetic nature, and therefore only neutrally positive. Balanced elements are, and will be stored within it, whilst the physical subconscious stores both positive and negative elements. Both forms, that is, both the creative energetic unconscious and the physical subconscious, can be regarded as a kind of archive in which everything relevant is stored, separated by area in both forms, which is why teaching letter 154 also speaks of different forms of the unconscious. The impulses transmitted from the creative energetic unconscious to the physical unconscious thus pass from one area of the creative energetic unconscious to the corresponding area of the physical unconscious. It is therefore correct that the creative energetic unconscious provides impulses in many ways, also that the physical subconscious receives impulses in many ways, each within its own corresponding area. In contrast to the creative energetic unconscious, the subconscious of the physical thinking apparatus also stores all information relating to the character of the human being. And since these character traits are, as we have learned and experienced daily, largely negative, an enormous amount of negativity is thus stored in the physical subconscious. Although the impulses from the creative energetic unconscious are always neutral positive, they are, as a rule, also interpreted negatively and consequently implemented in an unbalanced manner, due to the negative deposits in the physical subconscious and the negative character of human beings. The human being's character is formed and developed exclusively through self-education, which is why all expressions of human life that are not of a purely material nature are determined by their self-formed and self-shaped character. Consequently, the character of the human being is changeable at any time, and no compulsion emanates from it if the human being is prepared, through insight, self-education and reason, to shape it and transform it for the better and for good. It is also necessary to add that there exists a creative energetic consciousness which possesses its own creative energetic unconscious, yet, unlike the human, physical consciousness complex, has no subconscious. This means that the creative energetic consciousness can, at any time, consciously access all information ever stored in the creative energetic unconscious, and also consciously utilize it, without being dependent on impulses from the creative energetic unconscious. Just as an archivist can access all the information in their archive at any time and work with it, so too can the creative energetic consciousness access all information stored in the creative energetic unconscious at any time and work with it consciously immediately. In contrast, the physical consciousness complex also possesses both a conscious mind as well as an unconscious and a subconscious. The subconscious and unconscious cannot be addressed directly via the conscious mind, but only through impulses which reach the unconscious and subconscious via the sensor and trigger the desired or required information there in the form of further impulses, which are then routed back to the conscious mind via the sensor in the same way, where the human being receives them as an impulse, idea, impulse, hunch or vague feeling, etc., and thus begins to work with them intellectually, or simply disregards and ignores these impulses. In contrast to the creative energetic consciousness, the human being is therefore unaware of the contents of their unconscious and subconscious and can only work with them once they have been released by the subconscious and the unconscious. This more complex process serves, on the one hand, as a protective mechanism against overloading the conscious mind, which is also only ever granted access to the information it is capable of processing, and on the other hand, it acts, so to speak, as a pre-filter, holding back negative information so that it cannot enter the realm of creative life energy.
Excerpts from the Correspondence 19 by Bernadette Brand.
Although I am fortunate enough to be able to work closely with Billy and can turn to him at any time with questions, which often turn into a private, tailor-made lesson on the subject of the creation energy teaching, naturally, also not everything is immediately clear to me, and sometimes I need quite a long time before I can truly understand and grasp something. In this regard, I always assume that I have correctly understood and learned something in theory when I can explain it in my own words, without errors and in a way that is comprehensible. Billy's new explanations regarding the lines of prophets, in particular, gave me plenty to think about, and I found them rather difficult to grapple with until I realized how the connections fit together. It was only when I realized that everything and anything, also the most material of matter, is a manifestation of creative energetic energy, and thus profoundly neutral, did the penny of understanding slowly force its way through the slot until it finally dropped and landed with an audible clatter on fertile ground, at least for the time being. This time, the persistent questioning from passive members, for which I am very grateful, also helped me get the hang of it regarding Billy's explanations in Michael's video, so that I could finally distinguish the various forms of lines from one another, make sense of them for myself, and finally put them into words.
Question. This is the latest question regarding the lines of prophets, which finally helped me get to grips with the matter. I get the impression that in the videos, various things are mentioned directly one after the other, or even, in some cases, somewhat intertwined, whereas they might be easier to understand if they were deliberately separated or presented distinctly. For me, there are 3 topics. 1. Bloodline, line of kinship. For example, great-great-great-grandfathers, or great-great-great-grandchildren, etc. Here, it is clear that a blood relationship is not strictly necessary for a line of prophets to exist over centuries or millennia. 2. Personalities. Here, it is clear that personalities are always new over time and never return as the same personalities. Thus, terms such as rebirth and reincarnation, etc., are inappropriate or incorrect. However, a misunderstanding can still arise here. A concrete example.
a particular form of creative energy animated Person A 100 years ago and currently animates Person B. Thus, both persons share the same line of creative energy. But if the question is asked in general terms, was Person B once Person A? Answer: short and sweet. No. Reason: Person B is simply a new personality. Person A was a predecessor personality. Person B was not Person A. Person A was simply the predecessor personality. If one simply says no without stating the reason, the impression might arise that Person B has absolutely nothing to do with Person A. But that is also incorrect, for Person B is in the same line of creative energy forms as Person A. Thus, a connection exists, and this connection is by no means insignificant. 3. Creation energy form lineage. Billy's line of creation energy forms is currently unclear, and had previously been apparently clear amongst Figu members for a long time, not least because of the Nocademion book. I am confident that the matter will be clarified in the medium term.
Reply: Thank you very much for your email, which on the one hand has clarified your questions for me, and on the other hand has also taken me a step further, so that I can confidently give you an answer that I hope is sound. 1. The bloodline. This is purely material/physical, and is constantly refreshed by new partners. At best, it can stretch over centuries and millennia and remain traceable, or it can die out if, at some point, no more offspring are conceived. Since every personality within a very long-lasting bloodline is animated by a separate creation energy that is completely independent of the bloodline, it may happen under certain circumstances that a herald, or also in extremely rare cases several, appear within a bloodline that can be traced back a very long way. 2. Personalities. Every personality exists only once, and will never appear again in the same or a similar form. It passes away forever with death and, due to the laws of evolution, cannot appear again, as it changes not only during the current, active life, also in the beyond, where everything learned through evolution is processed and compared with and supplemented by what already exists, leading to a completely new personality that is absolutely independent of the old one. Consequently, rebirth is therefore absolutely ruled out and belongs to the realm of heresies and lies. Misunderstandings in this regard are based on a false understanding or erroneous conclusions. 3. Creation energy form lineage. Although a line of creation energy forms exists, and this exists as an inseparable unity of animating creation energy and evolutionary creation life energy, forming, so to speak, a fixed package of creation energy, it can neither be ascertained nor proven by human beings at our stage of development. The animating creation energy is pure energy, and can therefore animate any newly created human or human-like evolutionary life form throughout the entire creation. That is, in all 7 universes. In plain terms, this means that it is absolutely impossible to determine which past personalities were animated by a particular form of creation energy. All the more so as this creation energy can be active throughout creation in each of the 7 universes. Since the evolutionary creation life energy is also firmly linked to the animating creation energy, the actual line of creation energy forms arises through this, which is solely oriented towards evolution and is constantly developing, thereby changing just as the personality does. However, since evolution encompasses a great many aspects and details, all of which must be brought to a certain culmination. It is not necessarily the case that a package of creative energy forms which once animated a life form acting as a messenger must in future animate life forms with the same task again. For even such a package of creative energy forms can animate any human being or human-like evolutionary life form in all 7 universes. The tasks a human or human-like life form undertakes and carries out during its active lifetime are not determined by the creation life energy, but solely by the material human life form, which acts in accordance with its own interests, abilities, discretion, and skills, as well as the opportunities available in its life. In concrete terms, this means that a personality who is the bearer of a package of creation energy, which at some point once resided within a personality who acted as a herald, can engage in any activity whatsoever, since they are unaware of which personalities preceded their current life. This is precisely why they take up and live their new life, also in a completely neutral and unburdened manner. Nor should it be forgotten that the package of creation energy has also changed as a result of evolution, and is entirely new when it animates a new human life form. 4. Line of teaching. This is where the greatest misunderstanding lies, one which also led to a temporary sense of uncertainty for me. Fundamentally, it makes absolutely no difference whether the personalities who proclaim and disseminate the creation energy teaching are bearers of a package of creation energy that previously belonged to a proclaimer or not. For as evolution progresses, not only are the material personalities new each time, but also are the creation energy packages, which also continue to evolve, transform, and are consequently, so to speak, new each time. However, this further development in terms of creative life energy apparently makes it possible for the comprehensive neutral knowledge of the creation energy teaching to be accessed through a wide variety of carrier personalities of a wide variety of creation energy packages, and for this knowledge not only to be reactivated, but also expanded on the basis of the teaching, provided the necessary conditions are met. This means, however, that the actual lineage, which we have hitherto misinterpreted as a personality lineage, is in truth a teaching lineage that can be taken up by any personality whose package of creation energy is sufficiently developed, provided they possess the requisite ability and skill, and continued on the basis of the teaching. Since the creation energy teaching does not change between 2 messengers, it is therefore only in this respect that one can speak of a rebirth of the teaching on the basis of the retaking up and the continuation or refinement of the teaching. Fundamentally, the teaching of the creation energy, also known as the teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life or the teaching of the messengers, has been and is complete since its inception, when Nocademion first became aware of it through impulses from the Arahat Afasata plane, and forms a self-contained unity. The parts of the teaching that Nocademion originally explored first and then revealed doctrinally, teaching them to his peoples in accordance with their level of understanding, were merely an initial insight into the entire, exceedingly comprehensive teaching that applies to all humanities across all 7 universes. Every herald who followed Nocademion subsequently explored the teaching further and, in accordance with their people's stage of development and understanding, revealed further parts of the ever-unchanging teaching to them, thereby continuing the teaching. This is also what Billy is doing today amongst the humanity of Earth, instructing them, in accordance with their understanding and stage of development, about the existence of creation energy and its interrelationships and workings. Those parts of the creation energy teaching which he is developing for the Pleiaren are therefore based on the same comprehensive teaching, but deal with entirely different and significantly more advanced topics than he can teach us Earth humans, who are still at a low stage of evolution.